Chapter 441, The Final Counterattack. Hovering in midair, Nathan studied Yuki Osawa standing on the rippling water below, a dozen mist ninjas arrayed at his back. He raised his hands just slightly. He had no wish for a prolonged battle, only enough display of strength to force the mist assassins to think twice before turning on him. If he showed any hesitation, they'd never regroup under his banner again. Nathan's chakra wings trembled at his shoulder blades, holding him aloft as he wove a complex series of hand seals. Instantly recognizing the danger, Osawa barked, "Watch out!" and flung a razor-sharp kunai in Nathan's direction. But Nathan merely pivoted in midair, letting the kunai slice through empty space. As he twisted away, Nathan completed the seals and unleashed his technique. Fire Release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Jutsu. In an instant, hundreds of blazing fireballs streamed from his outstretched palms like petals hurled by a divine storm. The fiery orbs streaked across the battlefield, striking each mist ninja squarely and sending tongues of flame dancing over their ranks. Warned by Osawa Yuki's shout, the mist ninjas sprang into action. No matter how fiercely Nathan hurled his fireballs, they simply dissipated against the swirling vapors around his foes. Seizing the opening, Yuki dropped into a low stance, his fingers weaving intricate seals. A surge of chakra flowed from his feet into the seawater at their feet, and in an instant, a colossal water dragon erupted from the waves, its roaring form arcing straight toward Nathan. Nathan barely registered the technique's name, Water Dragon Bullet Technique, before reacting. He summoned the chakra wings that unfurled behind his shoulders and beat them with lightning speed. In a blink, he left a faint afterimage on the wind, hurtling more than 10 meters to one side as the dragon slammed its roaring head where he just stood, sending up a tidal spray. Yuki froze for a moment, ready to twist his hands into another set of seals and unleash more ninjutsu, but Nathan refused to grant him the chance. With fluid precision, he plunged his hand into his ninja pouch, ripping out half a dozen kunai each fitted with detonating talismans. Simultaneously, the 3 Magatama-shaped markings in his irises began to spin, sensors locking onto Yuki and the dozen or so mist ninjas crouched behind him. Then Nathan let fly the kunai. Each blade whistled through the damp air, their talismans arcing with latent energy, ready to strike first blood. Swish! The sharp, slicing sounds cut through the chaos. More than a dozen Kirigakure mist ninjas leaped back instinctively, even Osawa Yuki's jutsu collapsing mid-incantation as the shockwave ripped through her chakra flow. Boom, boom, boom! Explosions thundered in succession. Fireballs arced skyward while shockwaves heaved the sea into 3-meter waves. Seizing the moment, Nathan snapped his fingers into the final hand seals. Wind Release, Wind Blade. A translucent, razor-edged wind blade shot from his palm. Instantly, a strangled scream ripped across the deck. A mist ninja, still reeling from a barrage of kunai and explosive tags, never had a chance to dodge. The wind blade cleaved him in half, and a geyser of blood spouted over the deck, turning the waves beneath crimson. Zimu! A Kirigakure Chunin nearby howled in horror and charged, hurling a kunai. Nathan merely flexed his chakra wings, drifting aside as the blade whistled past. Before his opponent could recover, Nathan's hands blurred through the seals once more, and another wind blade sliced into the fray. Nathan's next transparent wind blade sliced through the air. The Kirigakure Chunin twisted just in time, but only just. Half of his shoulder was cleaved away, the jagged wound held together by little more than a scrap of muscle and skin. A tortured scream tore from his throat. Before the wounded shinobi could collapse, Nathan's hand already wove another seal. He braced to unleash a finishing strike, but at that moment, a new threat pulled him up short. A massive crossbow bolt, as thick as an arm and festooned with detonating talismans, hurtled straight for him. Huh? Nathan muttered, and then dashed aside, the bolt thudding into the frozen waves behind him in a thunderous blast. Ice shards flew skyward in a violent spray, but Nathan was already pivoting to track his assailant. Not far away, the sea's surface had turned to a slick, mirrored sheet of ice. Atop it stood a lone ballista, its wooden frame scarred from travel, its massive bowstring drawn. Nathan recognized it instantly. He'd seen that same piece of siege equipment in Feiyu Town just 2 days earlier. He'd assumed the Kirigakure force had left their heavy weapons behind on this mission, Now it seemed they simply hadn't had the chance to deploy them until now. Only one ballista. Nathan's mind raced. Why just one? He pressed his advantage, wine still swirling at his fingertips, ready to confront whatever other tricks the hidden mist had left in store. Nathan scanned the battlefield, recalling that there had been 21 ballistae in total. He'd already destroyed 6, so 15 should remain. Where had these come from? His thought was cut short when several mist ninjas whipped open the scrolls strapped to their backs. In an instant, more than a dozen ballistae shimmered into existence around him. The missing machines, assembled at lightning speed. Nathan's lips twitched in exasperation as he realized 24 or more ninjas had quietly surrounded him. Without a word, they split into pairs, each duo sliding behind a ballista and moving with the precision of seasoned soldiers. The smooth, practiced motions spoke volumes. They'd been ready for this all along. Nathan's pulse quickened with renewed interest. A tense stillness fell. Then, with a chorus of swishes, the ninjas loosed their bolts. Inside Nathan's eyes, the 3 magatama, mystical, comma-shaped jewels, began to spin wildly, seeking targets. In a blur, each magatama sprouted ethereal wings and flared skyward. Boom, boom, boom. The bolts struck wards painted on the ground. Instantaneously, dozens of crimson fireballs erupted, streaking upward and blotting out the last glow of the setting sun. The sky turned blood red as Nathan readied himself for the onslaught and smiled. Amid the roaring inferno, Nathan burst forth like a flaming arrow, hurtling toward the eastern flank of the enemy fleet. With the lead ninja pursuing other targets, the remaining Mist Village shinobi had clustered defenselessly around the crossbow battery, its weakest point. Nathan seized the opportunity. In the blink of an eye, he hovered above the target ship, wings still beating against the heat of battle. Before he could strike, the lone mist shinobi who'd stayed behind formed a series of hand seals and invoked water escape jutsu. In an instant, dozens of water spheres, each the size of a child's fist, surged up from the sea and crashed into Nathan like cannon fire. A flicker of alarm crossed him, but he reacted instantly. Activating his Sharingan, he angled his wings and weaved through the airborne deluge. Within breaths, the water orbs dissolved harmlessly around him. Nathan wasted no time. As the last droplets vanished, he completed his own seals and inhaled deeply. "Fire escape, dragon's flame technique," he roared. A sinuous dragon of crimson fire erupted from his mouth, roaring toward the surprised mist shinobi and lighting up the night sky. Nathan barely had time to react when the mist-hidden ninja sensed his attack and slipped aside. Unfazed, he unleashed a rapid succession of jutsu: fire style, great fireball technique; water style, water dragon bullet technique; and wind style, wind blade. None struck true, but the combined onslaught was enough to force the ninja back. Seizing the moment, Nathan formed another hand seal and roared out fire style, dragon fire technique, immediately following with fire style, great fireball technique. The twin infernos tore into the prow of a second mist-hidden vessel, reducing its hull to splinters. As flames and smoke billowed, Nathan prepared to finish it, but a fresh volley whistled toward him. He glanced across the water to see crossbow carts spitting iron bolts in his direction. This time, only a third as many arrows flew, but Nathan's relief was short-lived. Behind those carts, 2/3 of the crossbow platforms were poised, bolts loaded and waiting for him to dodge again. He crouched low, fingertips brushing the surface of the water as he readied his next sequence. The mist-hidden navy might be regrouping, but Nathan had fire, water, and wind at his command, and he wasn't about to let them catch him off guard. It was clear the enemy wanted to shorten Nathan's windows of opportunity by firing in alternating volleys, keeping him from taking out the mist-hidden warship. Realizing their tactic, Nathan abandoned his attack and concentrated entirely on dodging the incoming crossbow bolts. Chapter 442, Retreat. After a few breaths, Nathan slipped out of the crossbow cart's effective range, having narrowly evaded 4 bolts in quick succession. Looking down, he saw the mist-hidden ninja warships closing in again. Several mist ninjas had peeled off their main formation to reinforce a unit under the mist-hidden ninja's lieutenant on the fleet's eastern flank, sealing what had been a thin spot in their defenses. To the south, a dozen crossbow carts still hungrily eyed them, their crews ready to unleash another volley. the enemy lines now seemed virtually impenetrable. Ahead, the remaining mist ninjas showed no sign of faltering. Not enough pressure yet, Nathan thought, steeling himself for what came next. He pivoted and struck toward the fleet's northern sector, by far the most distant from the crossbow nests. At once, the southern defense commander, known as Snow Mountain, spotted the maneuver and roared, "Fire! Swoosh! Swoosh! Swoosh!" 5 bolts cut through the air in Nathan's direction. He tightened his grip on his weapon, eyes focused on the deadly projectiles as they screamed toward him. Chakra wings unfurled behind Nathan as bolts screeched past him. He twisted aside just in time to avoid the first crossbow shot, then harnessed the explosion's shockwave to rocket himself forward, straight toward the Kirigakure fleet. A second volley of crossbow bolts whistled through the air, but Nathan didn't hesitate. He slapped his hand into a sealing gesture and called upon his chakra, wind style, wind blade. In an instant, a translucent blade of swirling air, over 10 meters long, materialized before him. With surgical precision, it sliced through the approaching bolts, the wind blade shearing 3 of the 5 crossbows clean in 2. Those shattered bolts veered wildly off course, harmlessly clattering to the sea below. Nathan merely pivoted his body to let the remaining 2 bolts whistle past. Moments later, he stood only yards from the Kirigakure fleet, wind still roaring in his ears. Nathan narrowed his eyes as the mist-hidden ninjas readied their defense. "Attack!" their leader barked, and the mid- and lower-rank shinobi lunged forward, hurling kunai and shuriken in a deadly volley. A flock of blades streaked toward him, but Nathan's 3 Magatama Sharingan flared to life, its heightened perception guiding him effortlessly around every projectile. With barely a breath, he shifted into hand seals and unleashed his next move. Fire style, dragon flame technique. A colossal, serpentine blaze sprang from his palms, coiling toward the enemy warship behind their formation. For a moment, it seemed unstoppable, until the mist ninjas answered with their own ninjutsu. Water style, water array wall. A towering barrier of water shot up between Nathan and the ship. The fiery dragon slammed against it with bone-shuddering force, bulging the wall outward in a massive steaming dent, but it could not break through. A hiss of vapor filled the air as fire met water, and the technique sputtered to nothing. Nathan's lips curved into a brief wry smile. On solid ground, that fire dragon would have obliterated most defenses. Here at sea, however, the Mist Ninja's water-style proficiency and the ocean's very presence gave their jutsu an overwhelming advantage. He'd have to rethink his strategy if he wanted to turn the tide of this battle. Nathan's flame-release escape technique was operating at barely 60% of its normal power. Even if he pushed every last drop of chakra into it, he still couldn't penetrate his opponent's defense. Credit where it was due, the Kirigakure shinobi had made a smart choice by holding a solid guard instead of launching a reckless counterattack. With no second chance to cast another jutsu, Nathan braced himself. A sharp whistle sliced through the air again. The third volley of crossbow bolts streaked toward him. This time, the distance had closed so much that Nathan had almost no time to react, and any hesitation would trap him in their lethal range. But he was ready. He beat his wings twice, twisted a full 180 degrees, and rocketed upward and to the rear in one smooth motion. If one assault failed, he'd simply pull back and regroup, flit thousands of feet away if necessary. He refused to believe that the Mist Village's crossbowmen could remain infinitely effective. If he kept up this hit-and-fade pattern a few more times, he might not sink their entire flotilla, but he could certainly exhaust their supply of bolts. And once their defenses grew thin, the warships would be helpless against his next strike. Nathan was certain that if he kept up the pressure, the Kirigakure ninja on the front lines would eventually be forced back into the fight. Once they committed, he could send word to Sano Nobuhisa, coordinate their forces, and drive the enemy into retreat. With that plan in mind, he acted immediately. The moment Nathan cleared the crossbow cart's effective range, he banked sharply and dove toward the Kirigakure fleet below. His approach was methodical. Slip past 2 volleys of bolts, turn on the jets under cover of a small squad of Kirigakure ninja, strike the ships, then pull back at the first hint of a counterattack. As expected, the southernmost archers would unleash a third wave of quarrels just as he fell away. If they held their fire, Nathan adapted, re-engaging to keep them off balance and to bleed their ammunition stores dry. At first, Ozawa Yushu hadn't noticed the pattern, but after Nathan repeated the maneuver twice, Yushu finally grasped the strategy. Nathan was baiting them, forcing the crossbow crews to expend their best shots in futile pursuit. After careful consideration, Ozawa Yushu realized they had no effective countermeasures. In the end, the ninja world respects only one thing above all else: strength. No matter how many devices or strategies you deploy, if you lack the power to back them up, you'll be led around by the nose and ultimately beaten. Right now, the Fog Shinobi found themselves in exactly that position. Ozawa's face shifted as he reviewed the latest reports from the front. It was clear they could not capture Blackstone Stronghold. With a reluctant breath, he issued the order to withdraw. His forces were not yet exhausted, but this was the moment to pull back. If they pressed on expecting a last-minute miracle, retreating later would turn into a chaotic rout. Besides, the attack on Blackstone had never been the village's true objective. It was only a feint. Drawing back now would not look like defeat. As Ozawa's command echoed through the ranks, the Fog Ninjas facing the Konoha forces organized themselves under the guidance of their senior officers and fell back in disciplined formation. General Sano Nobuhisa watched the mist forces withdraw toward the Blackstone stronghold and for a moment considered ordering a pursuit. Then fresh reports came in about the shattered state of the Konoha units still in the field, and he shook his head. Konoha was already stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts. Their priority now was to hold their ground, not chase every retreating squadron. The Blackstone stronghold wasn't the Mist Village's main target, and recapturing Feiyu Town, while inevitably important, could wait. For the time being, it was enough to secure the stronghold and keep any remaining Mist operatives from slipping back into Feiyu Town. Having made his decision, Sano dismissed the pursuit plan. Still, he wouldn't leave anything to chance. A surprise counterattack from the Mist could undo all their efforts. He called over Nathan, formerly known as Qing Ming, and instructed him to tail Wu Yin's fleet until it had fully withdrawn, ensuring no hidden detachments remained behind. Nathan nodded eagerly. Rather than risking his own body, he split off a shadow clone. The duplicate could climb to great heights and follow the enemy fleet without drawing notice. With that, the clone shot upward, streaking after Wu Yin's ships like a silent specter. Back at his training grounds, the real Nathan turned his focus back to his regiment. Today's drills still awaited Hage, and he wasn't about to let them slip. Chapter 443, Rapid Improvement. Night had settled over the Blackstone base by the time Nathan finally returned from several grueling hours of training. Opening the door to his quarters, he was met with a familiar silhouette, his own shadow clone. The two stared at each other for a heartbeat before the clone dissipated into wisps of darkness, leaving behind a surge of scattered memories. First came the scene of Nathan accompanying the routed Kirigakure Shinobi back to Feiyu Town. He barely registered it. Commander Ozawa Yuki had obeyed orders without incident, leading the surviving enemy troops to safety without a hitch. That flash quickly faded and was replaced by the memory of being summoned to Captain Sano Nobuhisa's strategy meeting upon his return. Nathan skimmed over the details. Sano, pressed for time by conflicts on 4 fronts, had only delivered the essentials: casualty figures from their recent engagement and updates on the other battlefields. The one strategic takeaway was clear. This assault by the Hidden Mist Village was focused on exploiting a gap in the southern defense line. With those images evaporated, Nathan stepped fully into his quarters. The vulnerability in the south weighed on his mind. If he wanted to stay ahead of this war, he thought he'd have to improve faster than ever before. This also explains why Ozawa Yuki pulled back so calmly. Not only had he applied tremendous pressure, but his unit wasn't even the primary strike force. As it stands, neither side has won. The engagement has dragged on so long that it's become a grinding stalemate. Troops have already been rotated twice, yet the fighting still rages. Sano Nobuhisa has ordered everyone to stay ready for reinforcements. The village has agreed to send an elite detachment, but it will be some time before they arrive. If our lines begin to falter, those reserves will almost certainly be redirected here first, an order personally delivered by Commander-in-Chief Nara Kiyomitsu, and one we cannot afford to ignore. Sano has also outlined several follow-up assignments, but none of that concerns Nathan. His sole mission remains tonight's routine, to scout the Mist Ninja's movements in Feiyu Town. Of course, he won't be going out this evening. Both Konoha and Kirigakure Shinobi are still recovering from the last clash and have no appetite for another fight just yet. Nathan didn't have to go out tonight. After drilling late into the night yesterday and putting in several more hours today, combined with the explosive power of Earth-style turbo gun, he could almost taste success. He was that close to etching Earth-style turbo wall and Earth-style hardening technique onto the imprint panel. "Come on," he murmured to himself, brimming with quiet confidence. He raised his hands, formed the Ren seal, and activated the shadow clone technique. In a rising swirl of chakra smoke, two identical Nathans solidified beside him. Without a word, he issued his command, "Let's get started." "Yes," both clones replied in unison, then strode to opposite corners of the training chamber. There, each clone leafed through the mental notes he'd memorized on the hardening technique, replaying every detail. Nathan watched them begin the rigorous muscle and chakra conditioning exercises that would lay the groundwork for the fully formed jutsu. He decided to master Earth-style hardening technique first. The technique's constant rumbling and shockwaves made it notoriously loud, too conspicuous if he lost control. Once the clones had the fundamentals down, he could refine the jutsu into the Earth barrier of his second goal, Earth-style turbo wall, without drawing unwanted attention. Nathan tucked his hands into his sleeves, narrowed his eyes, and settled in to monitor their progress. Tonight, the silence, or the carefully muffled tremors of hardening Earth, was entirely his. Nathan glanced at the two newly learned techniques and weighed his options. The first jutsu, a high-impact skill, was tempting, but once unleashed, it would inevitably draw a crowd. He preferred to key PA low profile and decided to shelve it for now. Instead, he focused on the Earth-style hardening technique. Since it only affected his own body, success or failure wouldn't attract any unwanted attention, making it perfect for practice in this setting. More importantly, it would boost his survival odds in a fight. For most shinobi, cramming such a defensive technique at the last minute would be futile. Simply knowing the basics didn't grant enough power to make a difference. Nathan, however, wasn't like most ninjas. Thanks to his proficiency panel, he could imprint the Earth-style hardening technique directly onto it. Then, by channeling chakra into the panel, he could catapult his mastery to an advanced level in an instant. That meant the technique would actually work as intended, rather than fizzle out. With that advantage in mind, Nathan resolved that his final minute study of the Earth-style hardening technique was anything but a waste of time. It was exactly the kind of edge he needed. Nathan shifted his focus away from the two shadow clones and settled cross-legged on his bed. Calmly, he cycled through the Palm Immortal technique and then the Reflection Heart technique, fortifying his body while carefully guiding his Sharingan toward its next stage of evolution. Hours slipped by until finally it was the second half of the night. He dispelled his clones, reviewed the night's gains in his status panel, and suddenly froze. A slow grin spread across his face. "At last," he whispered. He reopened the interface, and there it was, a brand new skill slot, Earth Escape, Hardening Technique, Level 0, 100. He had successfully inscribed the new jutsu into his repertoire. Excitement surged through him as he drew in a deep breath and let it out steadily. Refocused, Nathan formed the necessary hand seals and activated the shadow clone technique, spawning 5 identical duplicates in an instant. With a curt nod, he commanded each clone to practice the Earth Escape, hardening technique. 5 bodies, 5 times the training speed. Before long, this new ninjutsu would be ready for real combat. In just over 10 minutes, Nathan broke through to the entry tier, Level 1. That included all the pauses he'd taken to think and absorb the lessons. Without them, he might have progressed even faster. As his last shadow clone dissolved, a spark of insight lit up in his mind. He closed his eyes, formed the necessary hand seals, and focused his chakra. A few seconds later, he opened his eyes in triumph. He had mastered the ninjutsu, Earth-style, hardening technique. Almost at once, Nathan's skin shifted from its natural pale tone to a mottled black and gray, radiating an unbreakable, rock-like resilience. To prove it, he grabbed a kunai and dragged its blade across his forearm. No pain registered, only a faint white scar appeared, then dissolved into nothing. He'd used almost no force, yet the blade barely nicked him. Even at level 1, this technique's defensive power was undeniable. As he continued to refine it, its protection would only strengthen. Soon, ordinary physical attacks would be little more than a nuisance. Pleased with his progress, Nathan released the Earth-style, hardening technique and split into 5 new shadow clones. Each one melted into the training area, chakras humming, ready to drill the technique and push their proficiency ever higher. Nathan stared as the proficiency bar finally clicked over 200 points. It had taken him more than half an hour, but the results were unmistakable. His defense had strengthened, and the time required to execute the Earth-style hardening technique had noticeably decreased. At this rate, he mused, if he spread the training across 5 shadow clones, he could probably hit level 3 in about an hour and a half. He forced himself to stop. His chakra reserves were running on fumes. Though this method accelerated his mastery, it devoured massive amounts of chakra. Climbing from level 0, 100, to level 2, 500, had already cost him nearly 30,000 chakra points. To reach level 3, he'd need another 50, 0,000, and he simply didn't have it. After a full day of battles, Nathan hadn't had a proper chance to recover. He'd trained late into the night, relying on the chakra refinement technique and the small fraction his body naturally regenerated just to make it this far. There was no shame in pausing. When chakra ran low, you learned that the smartest move was to slow down. And so he did, sheathing his focus for now, determined to resume only once his energy reserves recovered. Nathan felt a wave of fatigue wash over him. It was the perfect moment for a nap. With that in mind, he climbed back into bed, stayed fully dressed, and promptly drifted off to sleep. Chapter 444, The Ceiling Array. Nathan woke the next morning with a dull ache behind his eyes. He'd only had a few hours of sleep, but there was no time left for rest. He swung his legs over the side of the futon, straightened his uniform, and headed for the washroom. The cold water on his face washed away the last of his grogginess, and he felt his mind sharpen. He moved on to the cafeteria and devoured a quick breakfast. Originally, he'd planned to spend the morning practicing by the sea, but something made him pause as he stepped away from the tables. He stopped mid-stride, reached into his ninja tool pouch and pulled out a small vial of clear reagent. Inside floated dozens of white, unblinking spheres, his sealed, white eyes. He stared at them for a moment, recalling his duty to guard the seal. Without another thought, Nathan turned on his heel and dashed toward the logistics office. It wasn't a long walk, but his heart pounded with anticipation. Once inside, he approached the clerk and slid over a stack of merit points he had earned through his missions. In exchange, the clerk handed him a slim scroll case. The object sealing array, the clerk explained. This formation is a fundamental technology for creating storage scrolls. It works much like Jiraiya's fire sealing seal, but with broader applications. Where the fire sealing seal can only contain flames, the object sealing array can seal almost anything, metal weapons, potions, even living creatures, though it is far more difficult to master. Nathan nodded, carefully tucking the scroll case into his sash. With the reagent vial and now the sealing array in his possession, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Today's practice would be unlike any other. He was determined to perfect the formation before venturing out to face the challenges that awaited him beyond the village gates. If the 5 great shinobi villages had really wanted to innovate, they wouldn't still be shipping supplies in such a primitive convoy long after the Ninja World War. Drawing on memories of his past life and everything he's learned in the last 2 years, Nathan realized that in this world, only one person could create a true large-space storage scroll, Tiantian, one of the future 12 Guardian Shinobi. Her psychic scroll doesn't merely compress objects into a pocket dimension like an ordinary sealing technique. Instead, it bends time and space, summoning entire seas and colossal ships at will. Yamashiro Aoba even dubbed it the legendary portable warehouse, and for once the word legendary really applies. Despite the differences in execution, the underlying concept isn't so different from standard storage scrolls. What Nathan lacks is mastery of the sealing array itself. If he can learn that array and craft his own sealing scroll, he can safely store the volatile reagent bottle he carries. Otherwise, he'll never shake the nagging fear that it could go off at any moment. Nathan gripped his reagent bottle, weighing his options. He could reinforce it with the Guardian seal, but charging the seal long enough to craft both a talisman and a sealing talisman would take far too much time. It made far more sense to learn the sealing array properly and inscribe a sealing scroll instead. Others might doubt that he could master such a complex formation, but with the Guardian seal backing him, Nathan felt nothing but confidence, until reality hit him hard. By noon, the sun stood high over the open sea, casting a harsh glare on the rocky shore where Nathan practiced. Hours had slipped by, and he still hadn't succeeded in etching the sealing array's magic circle onto his panel, much less internalized its mechanics. Frustration mounting, he dispelled his shadow clone. Standing alone, he gazed down at his hands, disappointment clouding his features. Oddly, even the one bright spot, his earth release and hardening technique rising to level 3, failed to spark any joy. "What's going on?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Puzzled and unsettled, Nathan opened the heavy grimoire on sealing arrays once more. He leafed through the familiar pages, determined to uncover where he'd gone wrong. Nathan stared intently at the section outlining the prerequisites for learning the sealing object array. As he finished reading, surprise flickered across his face. The manual made it clear that mastering the sealing array wasn't simply a matter of drilling its incantations and formations. It demanded an acute perception of space itself. Without that spatial awareness, even perfect technique was worthless. It was the classic 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration scenario. Hard work could carry him almost all the way, but that final spark of insight, the ethereal sense of dimensional relationships, was absolutely indispensable. Nathan had assumed he could bypass this requirement by exploiting the proficiency panel, forcing the array onto the device. Now he saw his mistake. The panel could only cheat if it already recognized and bore an imprint of the array. To create that imprint, he first had to grasp the array's shadow, and to perceive that shadow, he needed genuine spatial acuity. Without unlocking that hidden dimension in himself, no shortcut would ever work. Nathan stared at the empty parchment before him, frustration knotting his hands into fists. He'd rehearsed the sealing array over and over, imprinting its complex sigils onto the panel, but without a true sense of spatial energy to anchor them, every attempt dissolved like mist at dawn. He was at an impasse. It was then that realization struck him. Sealing scrolls were so rare in the Shinobi world because so few understood or could harness the underlying spatial currents. Without that subtle awareness, the process would always falter. If only he could glimpse even the faintest echo of that power, he knew he could finalize the imprint. All he needed was a spark of inspiration. Summoning resolve, Nathan rose and formed the familiar hand seals. Shadow clone technique. In a flash, 5 identical Nathans stood at attention. He assigned each clone a different kata, defensive postures, offensive strikes, stealth drills, to keep their skills honed while he pursued his real objective. The final clone he sent on a mission, journey to the Blackstone stronghold, and exchange the merits he'd accumulated for a genuine sealing scroll. Those scrolls weren't sold openly, only traded sparingly to those who'd earned enough renown and service. But with Nathan's work on countless missions, his merit balance was more than respectable. If anyone could secure one, it was him. As the clone departed, Nathan allowed himself a fierce smile. Soon, he would hold in his hands the key to completing the sealing array, and nothing would stand in his way. Nathan nodded, then silently issued the command. His shadow clone didn't hesitate. It activated wind style, wind wings, and shot straight up into the sky. Watching the clone's retreating form, Nathan realized something exciting. His wind wings ability was on the brink of leveling up. He flipped open his status panel. Sure enough, after 2 days of relentless practice, the proficiency meter for wind style, wind wings had climbed from 652,000 to 16 2000 at level 4. At that rate, it would take no more than 2 days to break through to the next rank. And with his earth-style, hardening technique already at level 3, soon to be level 4, his defenses were about to improve dramatically. A smile finally tugged at Nathan's lips, banishing the frustration he'd felt over his stalled progress with the sealing array. He shook his head, determined to put that worry aside for now. Glancing across the courtyard, he noticed another shadow clone hard at work mastering earth-style, earth-flowing wall. Turning back to himself, Nathan settled into his stance and resumed practicing the immortal palm technique and the reflection heart technique. Having built a solid foundation with earth-style, earth lance and the earth-style, hardening technique, Nathan's command of earth chakra had leapt forward. In light of that steady progress, mastering earth-style, earth-flowing wall was now only a matter of time. There was no need to push himself recklessly. He spent every minute honing his form, repeating each motion until it felt as natural as breathing. At the end of his latest training cycle, a subtle ripple in the air announced the return of his shadow clone. The messenger had taken longer than anticipated, not because the exchange site was distant, but because the sealing scroll was a rare commodity. Even though Nathan's merit points more than covered the cost, any trade of such precious materials required approval from higher authorities. The extra time had been consumed by paperwork and clearances. Finally, however, the scroll was in hand. Chapter 445, Success. Nathan opened his eyes, studied the shadow clone standing before him, and glanced at the scroll in his hand. He nodded once and made the release sign. With a sudden puff of chakra smoke, the clone dissolved into nothing. Images flickered through Nathan's mind, fragments of memory he'd just absorbed, but he pushed them aside. He carefully unrolled the scroll and smoothed it flat on the ground. Every surface was covered in dense sealing runes, all focusing on the single massive character stamped in the center. Seal. Recalling the hand formation he'd memorized, Nathan raised his hands and formed the seal. In an instant, the central character flared to life, expanding into a swirling, ink-black seal that spread across the scroll's borders and seeped into the earth around him. He reached down, picked up a nearby stone, and placed it squarely within the glowing circle. With a crisp motion, Nathan reactivated the sealing script. The runes writhed like living serpents, crawling over the stone until it was fully encased, then vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Only the character seal remained, glowing softly in the scroll's center. Nathan allowed himself a small smile. He closed his eyes, content that the sealing technique was a success. Nathan barely caught a glimpse of something impossible the moment he opened and closed the ancient scroll. A fleeting pocket of unknown space that, despite its brevity, filled the gap in his understanding. No sooner had the vision vanished than he deftly formed a hand seal and attempted to cast the sealing array. The incantation sputtered and failed, just as his first try at the guarding seal had, but then the skill quietly registered on his proficiency panel. He stared at sealing array, level 0, 1/100, and let out a relieved breath. Wasting no time, Nathan shifted into the Ren hand seal and activated the shadow clone technique. 5 perfect replicas of himself sprang into being, each one immediately diving into practice. They chanted the sealing array in unison, paused to mull over their mistakes, then started again. After 4 or 5 rounds of drills, Nathan dismissed the clones and absorbed their hard-won insights through his proficiency interface. With every cycle, their collective experience converted directly into his own skill, so that each new clone could advance without missing a beat. Within half an hour, Nathan had successfully mastered the sealing array. He glanced at his mission panel, Sealing Array, Level 1, 1/100, and allowed himself a genuine, satisfied smile. Slipping into meditation, Nathan closed his eyes and tuned into the space around him. As the sealing array activated in his system, his spatial awareness deepened. He could almost feel the subtle distortions and currents of space itself. This uncanny sensitivity was a rare gift among ninjas, a talent likely essential for any high-level time and space ninjutsu. Summoning techniques, which rely heavily on bloodline seals, demanded far less of this ability, but techniques like the Flying Thunder God technique, which manipulate space and instantaneously transport the user, required it in abundance. Without such a gift, one couldn't even begin. The realization filled Nathan with quiet excitement. He'd long dreamed of mastering the Flying Thunder God technique, and now he understood that learning the sealing array had given him the perfect foundation. With this first breakthrough behind him, he felt more confident than ever that his ultimate goal was within reach. Nathan took a steady breath and formed the necessary hand seals. He activated the sealing array on the scroll before him, withdrew the testing stone tucked inside, then reached into his ninja pouch for the vial containing the Byakugan. With the eye's power secured, he deftly resealed the scroll. He'd originally planned to upgrade his sealing array and craft a bespoke scroll to imprison the Byakugan. But now that he possessed the perfected sealing scroll, there was no need to reinvent the wheel. Why squander time and energy when he repurpose it? Every extra moment he saved would go toward refining his two core disciplines, the Palm Fairy technique and the Reflection Heart technique. These arts formed the bedrock of his combat prowess. Everything else could be postponed, but not these. Even though fatigue gnawed at him last night, he had pushed through several hours of grueling practice. He hadn't yet fulfilled all his daily training quotas, but each stroke of progress counted. Nathan paused, recalling the old proverb, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and rivers form only when countless streams converge." Now that he had the proficiency panel to guide him, there was no excuse to slack off. Even if he couldn't finish his training according to the original schedule, any practice was better than none. After all, this reborn life was a gift. He couldn't afford to waste a single chance to grow stronger. He set aside the scroll he'd been studying, shook his head to clear away distracting doubts, and steadied his breath. Forming a series of precise hand seals, he called upon his chakra and unleashed the shadow clone technique. With a loud crack, 10 identical Nathans emerged in the clearing, each one shrouded in faint wisps of chakra smoke. He assigned tasks at a glance. 6 clones leaped into formation to drill their water-style jutsu, constructing a flowing water array wall, firing concentrated water dragon bullets, and unleashing the roaring great shark bullet technique. Between each wave of water, they practiced close-quarters skills, the spiraling Rasengan, the piercing heart-rending strike, and the swift instant sword technique. 3 other clones turned inward, focusing on sealing arts. They layered guardian seals around invisible wards, wove intricate sealing arrays, and reinforced their bodies with the earth-style hardening technique. The final clone directed its efforts entirely to the earth-style earth flow wall, shaping a living barrier of shifting stone. As dawn light filtered through the trees, Nathan watched each reflection of himself train with unwavering determination. With every small advance, the 1,000-mile journey took its first true steps. Nathan sorted through his list of jutsu, deciding what to focus on next. Earth-style, Earth-Rising Spear, wasn't likely to see use anytime soon, so he set it aside. The thin extraction technique had just reached level 6 yesterday, but with still a long way to go before level 7, he decided to pause that one as well. And wind-style, Rasen Shuriken, was out of the question. He'd already poured all his remaining chakra into 2 sealing techniques and a pair of earth-style jutsu, leaving nothing for more advanced wind training. That left him with 2 options: wind-style, wind wings, and the shadow clone technique. Wind wings could be practiced during his nightly reconnaissance runs, so that would keep him occupied in the field. Shadow clone, however, required him to maintain his chakra at a deliberately low level to conserve energy, meaning he couldn't train it alongside any other skill. He'd limit himself to just 10 clones for each session, concentrating on the discipline of sustaining them without overtaxing his reserves. Even though they were merely illusions of himself, the process of juggling chakra so precisely felt oddly tedious. Still, Nathan knew the discipline would pay off in the long run. He steeled himself for the meticulous practice ahead, ready to transform these deliberations into real power. Nathan could have easily advanced his techniques if only he had more chakra, just as he had last night when he practiced the earth release, hardening technique. Unfortunately, his reserves were stretched too thin. Shaking his head, he pushed the thought aside and focused instead on honing the Palm Fairy technique and the heart reflection technique, more disciplines that would both strengthen his body and accelerate the evolution of his Sharingan. As for the chakra shortage, he already had a plan waiting for implementation after the war. There was no point in worrying about it now. Chapter 446. Calm evening settled in a flash. Nathan had just finished his last training session of the day and was about to rest before tonight's reconnaissance mission when he noticed something new on his skill panel. A brand new ability had appeared, Earth Style, Earth Flowing Wall. Surprised but determined, he spent the next several hours studying its mechanics and practicing the chakra flow required. By the end of his session, he'd successfully imprinted the technique into his panel. From now on, he could refine it simply by spending chakra until he mastered it. Still, Nathan knew he had to prioritize. He decided to raise the earth-flowing wall to only entry level for the moment, enough to call on it in a pinch without draining his reserves. His main focus remained the earth style, hardening technique. He planned to divert the 70,000 chakra he'd been saving for his wind style, Rasen Shuriken project and funnel it into improving his earth defenses instead. Based on his past training efficiency, Nathan estimated that investing 70,000 chakra would net him roughly 700 proficiency points per day in the hardening technique. Satisfied with his plan, he finally allowed himself to rest, confident that he was ready for whatever awaited on tonight's mission. Nathan studied the numbers hovering in front of him. To push his Earth-style hardening technique from level 3 to level 4 required 1,000 proficiency points, just a day and a half of training. Another 3 days after that would bring him to level 5, at which point the technique would be robust enough for real combat, capable of handling far more complex threats. The prospect filled him with eager anticipation. He frowned thoughtfully at the figures for his other skills. By pausing his practice of the fine trouble extraction technique, he'd freed up 5,000 chakra points. Along with the 4,000 chakra points he'd already set aside for Earth attribute development, he now had more than enough resources to advance both the Guardian Seal and the Sealing Array. There was no pressing need to master those sealing arts immediately. He could afford to develop them at a more measured pace. Satisfied, Nathan closed the proficiency panel and stood, loosening his stiff limbs. Without hesitation, he raised his right hand in a sealing gesture and focused his chakra into the wind style, wind wings technique. In an instant, a pair of translucent, pale blue wings sprouted from his back. He flexed them experimentally, feeling the rush of air as the feathers, pure chakra manifestations, fluttered beneath his shoulders. Then, with a graceful downbeat of his wings, he lifted off the ground and streaked toward the Blackstone stronghold. The wind roared past his ears as the fortress grew larger before him. 10 minutes later, Nathan descended silently onto the ramparts, ready for whatever lay ahead. Nathan finished his dinner, then headed to the mission office. Once briefed on his assignment, he took to the skies, flying south toward Feiyu Town. The report was clear. In the last 24 hours, the Mist Ninja there had shown no overt activity, an ominous silence that demanded extra caution tonight. Now, under a pale moon and a few scattered stars, Nathan hovered high above the town. He activated his Sharingan and surveyed the scene below. Feiyu's streets and rooftops glowed with lantern light. Every alley and rooftop seemed to hide a Mist Ninja, and every window offered a lookout silhouette. Both sides, the Mist Defenders and the Leaf Scouts, were braced for a surprise strike. Nathan's keen eyes picked out the heavier defense posts, crossbow carts mounted on balconies, their operators scanning the darkness. Here and there, Mist Ninja stood casually on roof ridges, open challengers rather than hidden threats. They wanted him to feel their presence, an intimidation tactic. Still, Nathan had no plans to storm their stronghold. He simply watched, waiting for the first real sign of movement. Nathan left Feiyu Town before dawn, determined not to waste another moment. He was confident no one could stop him, and he needed every second for training. The reef beach he'd scoped out earlier lay just beyond the village border. There, he summoned Wind Style, Wind Wings, twin gusts of wind that cradled him aloft and set him down lightly on the sand. Barely had his feet touched the shore than he wove the seals for the shadow clone technique. In a swirl of chakra smoke, 11 exact replicas of Nathan materialized. He scanned the ranks, then pointed to one clone and sent it back toward Feiyu Town to keep watch on the Mist Ninja. The remaining 10 fell into formation before him. Without missing a beat, Nathan tapped into the heart communication technique. Instantly, all 10 clones linked to his mind, sharing every observation, every heartbeat. For hours they moved as one, practicing strikes, refining seals, pushing their chakra control to the limit. Night slipped in unnoticed. The sea breeze whispered against rock and tide, and the Mist Ninja of Feiyu Town remained eerily silent. Under the cover of darkness, Nathan and his replicas drilled relentlessly, each one as focused as the original. At last, the first pale light of dawn stretched across the water. Nathan's eyes snapped open, and for a fleeting moment he expected to see his clones standing beside him. But the only movement was the tumble of waves on the shore. Everyone, Nathan included, had vanished with the sunrise. Nathan's shadow clones had just completed the scheduled training regimen. From the dead of night onward, he'd been drilling the painstakingly demanding palm immortal technique and reflection heart technique all on his own. Now, as dawn approached, exhaustion pinched at his mind, but the rising proficiency bars on his cultivation panel made every sleepless hour worthwhile. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled in a controlled sigh. Gathering his focus, Nathan formed a precise hand seal and activated the heart-connecting technique. Instantly, his consciousness linked with the shadow clone stationed over 20 kilometers away. After exchanging a few silent thoughts and confirming that everything in Feiyu Town remained calm, he dismissed the clone with a simple mental command. With no further obstacles, Nathan summoned a burst of chakra and unleashed wind-style, wind wings. Featherlight yet fiercely propulsive, the technique lifted him high above the treetops. He angled toward the distant outline of the black stone stronghold, its dark ramparts growing steadily larger beneath him. About 15 minutes later, Nathan drifted back down above the Blackstone stronghold. The Konoha shinobi on guard glanced his way but offered no challenge as he descended. The moment his feet touched the courtyard stones, Nathan dashed straight to his quarters. Inside, he collapsed at his desk and forced himself to draft a concise mission report. Satisfied, he sealed the document with a brief jutsu, formed the necessary hand seals, and unleashed the shadow clone technique. His copy swept out the door with the report in hand, vanishing into the hallway on its way to the command office. Nathan, meanwhile, sprinted toward the mess hall. Despite his prodigious chakra reserves, he naturally recovered far more than the average shinobi. He burned through energy at an equally remarkable rate and needed substantial meals to stay at peak performance. Normally, he relied on the ration pills issued to troops, but their chalky flavor left much to be desired. Whenever he had the chance, he preferred the cafeteria's steaming bowls of noodles. Even if the fare here was far from gourmet, it was leagues better than any pill. He slid into a seat, ordered 3 bowls, and polished them off in minutes. Full and newly energized, Nathan rose, tossed a grateful nod to the cook, and headed back toward his quarters, ready to tackle whatever mission lay ahead. Nathan didn't even wait for his dinner to settle before retreating to his room and collapsing into bed. When he finally stirred, the sun was already high in the sky, its golden light streaming through the window. Blinking against the glass, he raised an arm to shield his eyes and, after a moment's daze, sat up and smoothed out his clothes. He headed to the wash basin for a quick splash of water, then stretched his stiff limbs until a surge of energy ran through him. After tonight's meal, I'll get back to training. Perfect timing to push my earth style, hardening technique, and wind style, wind wings to the next level, he thought. Just then, Nathan's ears twitched at the sound of faint movement, and almost immediately afterward, someone knocked on his door. Chapter 447, When Trees Crave Stillness, the Wind Rages On. Knock, knock, knock. Nathan's senses snapped shut the moment he heard the urgent rapping on his door. A familiar aura lingered just beyond the threshold. Could it really be him? Pushing aside his lingering thoughts, Nathan rose and crossed the room. As he swung the old wooden door open, its hinges groaned in protest. The scraping wood struck his ears with an almost painful insistence, but there was no time to dwell on creaks and groans. In the corridor stood Nakagawa Ichiro, the Chunin messenger who so often accompanied Captain Sano Nobuhisa. Nathan had crossed paths with him more times than he could count. Ichiro's face was serious, his posture stiff with urgency. "What's happened?" Nathan asked, stepping aside to let him in. Without a word of preamble, Nakagawa replied in a clipped tone, "Nathan, Captain Sano requests your presence at the command center immediately." His words came fast, each one carrying the weight of an unspoken crisis. Nathan lifted an eyebrow. The captain's summons at this hour could only mean one thing: trouble. Grabbing his flak jacket, he headed for the door. As he disappeared down the corridor, the echoes of that desperate knock still rang in his mind. Proof that, no matter how much one might long for peace, the winds of duty would never relent. Nathan's brow furrowed as he leaned forward. "What's happened?" Lieutenant Nakagawa Ichiro glanced around to make sure no one else was within earshot, then lowered his voice to a whisper. "Our recon team just radioed in. Mist village operatives have made their move in Feiyu town." Nathan's frown deepened. Sano Nobuhisa had summoned him to this meeting with unusual urgency. It was clear this wasn't a false alarm. The Mist Shinobi were striking again, just when Nathan had hoped they'd lie low after their defeat 2 days ago. It seemed the quieter he tried to be, the more the wind howled. And once again, Nathan would have to scrap his training schedule to deal with their assault. The news did nothing to lift his mood. Seeing Nathan hesitate, Ichiro cleared his throat. "Jonin, Nathan?" Nathan shoved a hand through his hair, forcing himself to stay calm. "Gather our forces," he said at last. "We depart for Feiyu town within the hour." "Hey!" Nathan blinked awake at the familiar call. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he sat up and said, "I'll grab my gear and head over. You go alert the others." "Right." Nakagawa Ichiro gave him a sharp nod and bolted from the room. Nathan swung his legs out of bed and moved quickly. In minutes, he'd gathered his supplies, lockpicks, throwing knives, potions, and finally lifted the long sword resting on the table. He belted it to his side, then strode out, determination in every step. 10 minutes later, Nathan entered the headquarters conference room. Every team leader was already seated around the polished table. A hush fell as Sano Nobuhisa strode in and took the head seat. Without preamble, he laid out the latest intelligence gathered by the reconnaissance unit. "About 30 minutes ago, the Mist ninjas in Feiyu town split into 2 assault forces," Sano began, voice low and controlled. "One is advancing overland, the other is moving in by sea. Their objective is obvious. They intend to strike us simultaneously from both fronts." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "Based on their current pace, we estimate they'll be upon us in roughly an hour and a half." Heads nodded solemnly around the table. The room crackled with tension as everyone prepared for the battle to come. "Even with time set aside for rest and recovery, we'll be ready in under 3 hours. 3 hours. For shinobi famed for their swift, silent movements, 3 hours wasn't an eternity, but it wasn't nothing either. It was more than enough time to shore up the defenses of Blackstone Fortress. So why, Nathan wondered, had Lord Nobuhisa Sano summoned them in such haste? Nathan met Sano's steady gaze as the room fell silent. Then Sano cleared his throat and spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, "I propose we take the fight to the Mist clan, strike first rather than merely defend." A low murmur rose among the assembled ninja. "Attack preemptively?" someone asked, eyebrows raised. Nathan's pulse quickened. Of course, if Sano intended only to hold the fortress, there'd have been no need for this emergency meeting. Now it was clear, Sano wasn't satisfied with a passive defense. He wanted to seize the initiative and bring the battle to the enemy's doorstep. But what gave him such confidence? Nathan weighed the risks. Abandoning Blackstone Fortress meant losing its natural fortifications and familiar terrain. On the other hand, a bold strike could catch the Mist Ninja off guard and shatter their morale before they had a chance to regroup. He leaned forward, ready to hear Sano's plan, and ready to lend his every skill to whatever daring assault lay ahead. There's no way we can defend effectively on our own turf if we just sit back and let the enemy choose when to strike. It would squander much of our ninja advantage. Yet striking first carries its own benefits. It lets us seize the initiative, dictate the timing of battle, and deploy ambushes against the Mist Ninja while they're on the move, cutting off their escape routes or reinforcements. Every officer in this room is an elite, fully capable of anticipating the same tactics Nathan proposes. As soon as he outlined his plan, the chamber exploded into debate. Voices rose on strategy, logistics, and risk, so many ideas clashing that Nathan felt his temples throb. At last, he rapped his knuckles sharply on the table. Dong, dong, dong. The thudding sound silenced the room. All eyes swung toward him, and one by one the arguments died away. Nathan may be young, but his calm authority and proven combat record leave no doubt. When he speaks, everyone listens. Nathan met Sano Nobuhisa's steady gaze. Tell me exactly how many enemies we're up against, and how their forces are divided between land and sea. It was the question everyone else had in mind. Only Nathan had the authority to press for an answer. If Kirigakure had sent only a token force, they could still mount an effective defense or even go on the offensive. But if the Mist Ninjas vastly outnumbered them, no scheme or trap would matter. In the face of overwhelming strength, all tactics become moot. Under the weight of every eye in the room, Sano hesitated. At last, he swallowed hard and said, "Their deployment is identical to last time." What? A ripple of disbelief and alarm swept through the ranks. The Konoha Shinobi had gone into this believing the Mist contingent would be smaller than before. To their surprise, the enemy force proved almost identical in size to the last incursion, and they'd beaten that one back without too much trouble. Surely they could do it again. They tried not to think about Nathan's performance 2 days ago. In that engagement, Konoha had suffered more dead and wounded than they cared to admit, while the Mist Shinobi had emerged with nothing more serious than bruises and scrapes. In other words, the enemy's strength had only increased since then. And yet here was Sano Nobuhisa, still insisting on taking the initiative. Murmurs of bewilderment rippled through the assembled ninja. What on earth was their leader planning? At the height of the confusion, Sano lifted a gloved hand. The chatter died instantly as he raised his fingers, signaling everyone to hold their questions, at least for now. When the room fell silent, Sano Nobuhisa spoke up. According to the latest report from Hyuga Maple Leaf, the Mist Ninjas sent this time are far weaker overall than they were yesterday. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for him to go on. Sano continued, Maple Leaf's scouts have noted a sharp rise in genin among their ranks and a corresponding drop in mid- and high-ranked ninja. In short, their numeric strength might be higher, but their experienced fighters are few, so we can hold our own. As he spoke, Sano shot Nathan a meaningful look. In his mind he thought, this young man alone matches the fighting power of several jonin. At this, the tension in the room eased. Everyone here trusted Maple Leaf's intelligence implicitly. His full name is Hyuga Maple Leaf, a special operations jonin of the Hyuga clan. For the past few days, he's been leading an elite reconnaissance team, watching and mapping Mist Ninja movements around Feiyu Town by daylight. If Maple Leaf says the enemy's strength has fallen, then they can believe it. With the prospects looking better than they'd feared, the leaders exchanged relieved nods. Tomorrow's battle would be tough, but with Nathan on their side and reliable intel from Maple Leaf, they finally had reason to hope. At that moment, Nathan and the others began to rethink Sano Nobuhisa's proposal. If the gap in strength wasn't too great, they could seize the initiative and strike first. With luck, they might concentrate their forces to wipe out the enemy coming from one direction, then turn their full attention to any attackers threatening from elsewhere. But there was a crucial caveat. The battle had to be swift and decisive. If they allowed the engagement to drag on, opposing forces from the other side could exploit the delay to strike their stronghold, cutting off any line of retreat. In that scenario, they wouldn't be able to bring their combined strength to bear on a single front. Instead, they would find themselves trapped and attacked from both flanks. Chapter 448, The Strategy Session. The meeting room buzzed with heated debate, voices rising above one another as commanders and senior shinobi argued over the best course of action. Ultimately, experience and a healthy dose of pride won out. It was far better to seize the initiative than to wait passively for the enemy to strike. By unanimous decision, 2/3 of the base's forces would assemble at the south gate and strike first, intercepting the Mist Ninjas as they advanced from the mainland. The remaining third of the troops would be split into 2 detachments. The bulk of them would stay behind to guard the base and tend to the wounded. No one wanted to risk an enemy raid on their own hospital wards. The final handful, expert in aquatic escapes and skilled at summoning water beasts, would embark by boat and shadow the mist-clad fleet at sea. Their mission: harass the enemy ships, delay their landing, and buy precious time for the main force to engage. As the generals finalized the deployment map and assigned squad leaders, a tense energy filled the room. Every shinobi present understood the stakes. If they could land this preemptive blow, they might thwart the Mist Ninja's assault before it even began. And if they failed, well, there was no point in dwelling on failure. They would give everything they had, and then some, to ensure that didn't happen. Nathan had originally been assigned to harass the Kirigakure fleet at sea, but Sano Nobuhisa, eager to leverage Nathan's exceptional combat skills where they'd have the greatest impact, insisted he join the land operation instead. Nathan didn't object. If they could wipe out this enemy force now, the Kirigakure ninjas would be too weakened to mount a serious attack for months, giving him the peace and stability he craved for his training. Everything, he reminded himself, was in service of that goal. Stepping out of the command tent, Nathan drew a deep breath. With a swift hand seal and a quiet incantation, he unleashed wind-style, wind wings. Air currents lifted him high above the battlefield, and within moments he was streaking toward Hinata Fengye's reconnaissance team. His mastery of flying ninjutsu had earned him an early departure. First to link up with Hinata and the scouts, then to shadow the Kirigakure patrols below and relay their movements to the main force. 10 minutes later, Nathan hovered over a dense forest canopy, scanning the terrain for signs of the enemy. But from this vantage point, the woods lay perfectly still. No movement, no flicker of light, not even a shifted branch to betray hiding shinobi. He frowned, waiting for the moment when the first Kirigakure opponent would emerge. Nathan hovered above the treetops, scanning the forest floor below. Where was Hinata Hyuga's team? By now, they should have been closing in. He shifted his gaze, growing more alert by the second. Suddenly, a cloud of tiny insects erupted from the trees beneath him, swarming directly toward his position. Had he not been vigilantly monitoring his surroundings and relying on his Sharingan, he might never have spotted them. Instead of striking immediately, Nathan remained perfectly still, allowing the insects to approach. Once they clustered around him, he recognized them instantly. They were Kikaichu, the parasitic bugs unique to the Aburame clan. That meant one of Hinata's scouts, a member of the Aburame, had already detected his presence. Sure enough, after encircling him a few times, the insects formed themselves into an arrow and pointed off into the forest. Nathan exhaled quietly. The message was clear. He soared off in the direction the Kikaichu indicated, ready to rendezvous with, or confront, the approaching squad. After only a few hundred meters, the arrow formed by the parasitic bugs suddenly tilted downward, pointing to the dense forest below. Nathan immediately understood that Hyuga Fengye's team was hiding there. He activated his Sharingan and swept the treetops and underbrush with careful scrutiny. Once he was confident no threats lay in wait, he dropped silently on the forest floor. He had barely landed when 4 figures stepped out of the shadows. Hyuga Fengye led the group, flanked by an Aburame clan shinobi whose dark sunglasses and heavily wrapped attire concealed the insects that lived within him. The 2 others were the operatives Nathan had learned about from Sano Nobuhisa, a civilian ninja of average skill who used an eagle-like summoned beast to relay intelligence back to base, and a Yamanaka clan specialist gifted in perception, and in a secret mind-reading technique designed to extract information straight from an enemy's thoughts. Nathan's 4 companions weren't frontline powerhouses, but each excelled at reconnaissance. As Nathan watched them, they watched him in return. Until now, he'd spent his time either on solo scouting missions or honing his skills out at sea, and had never crossed paths with these operatives. In fact, this was their first real meeting. Despite rumors of Nathan's prowess, the civilian ninja among them had only a vague notion of what he could do. The other 3, however, were seasoned shinobi in their own right, and they sensed just how terrifying his reputation truly was. Hearing about Nathan was one thing, witnessing him up close was another entirely. Suddenly, Hyuga Maple Leaf activated her Byakugan, her pale eyes scanning Nathan's form. Under that penetrating gaze, his chakra blazed like a miniature sun, so brilliant it stung their eyes. Even within the Blackstone stronghold, and throughout the entire Hidden Leaf village, none of them had ever encountered anyone radiating such overwhelming energy. In that moment, all of them understood the truth behind the saying, a name can cast a shadow as vast as a towering tree. Nathan's presence, and the raw power coursing beneath his calm exterior, left no doubt in their minds that he was in a league of his own. The Aburame shinobi felt the insects crawling beneath his skin shudder, as if they'd sensed a natural predator. Beside him, the Yamanaka shinobi simply couldn't shake the oppressive aura radiating from Nathan. It made his thoughts stutter under something far greater than a normal jonin's presence. For a long moment, the four ninjas exchanged uneasy glances in silence. Finally, Nathan broke the quiet. "Do you know who I am?" The four shared a knowing look and then bowed their heads. "Yes, Jonin Nathan. Captain Sano dispatched orders for us to give you our full cooperation." Nathan inclined his head once in acknowledgement. It wasn't surprising they'd learned of his arrival before he even stepped into the village. One of them had summoned an eagle-like creature whose flight outpaced his own shadow. Wasting no time, he pressed on. "Good. Now tell me, where are the Mist Ninja hiding in Feiyu Town?" "Which route will they take?" Nathan asked. Team leader Hyuga Fengye unfurled a parchment map and tapped a point. "This is our current position," he said. Then he tapped another spot farther off. "Here lies the Mist Clan's encampment." He traced a smooth arc between the two. "They'll move along this road." Nathan studied the map, committing the contours of the ridges and valleys to memory. Satisfied, he nodded. "Good. You four stick to the plan. I'll scout ahead." Without hesitation, he formed the seals, unleashed wind-style, wind wings, then drove off the ground with a single toe, soaring into the sky. In mere breaths, he vanished from sight. The four shinobi exchanged sharp looks, then, without another word, activated the body flicker technique and melted away into silence. Chapter 449, Ambush and Upgrade. Nathan flew several kilometers south before he finally spotted the telltale tracks of the Mist Ninja. They just exited a dense forest and were heading toward the woods where Hinata, Fengye, and the others lay in wait. Beyond that lay a broad valley, and past the valley, the outer walls of the Blackstone stronghold. "A valley," Nathan murmured. It was perfect terrain for an ambush, if only Sano Nobuhisa's team could seize it first. Otherwise, all his planning would come to nothing. Suppressing the thought for the moment, he flexed the chakra wings unfurling from his back, letting them carry him silently closer to the Mist Patrol. Before long, several of the shinobi picked up on his approach. With the Sharingan active, Nathan watched them tense and swivel their heads, scanning the sunlit sky. He didn't bother to conceal himself further. In broad daylight, without advanced stealth techniques, complete invisibility was impossible. Better to let them see him, and draw them exactly where he wanted. Nathan preferred to scout alone. Even if the Mist Ninjas spotted his trails, they rarely suspected an ambush waiting down the line, and they certainly wouldn't abandon their mission on a hunch. But today, Kirigakure had deployed an unprecedented number of shinobi, making no attempt to conceal their movements. That bold show of force spoke volumes. Neither side feared exposure now. The outcome would hinge on superior tactics and timing. From his perch on a ridge, Nathan swept his gaze over the Kirigakure formation. Several reconnaissance detachments fanned out like spokes, probing the perimeter while the main force held center. He watched their patterns for a few quiet moments, then silently shifted course and soared toward the adjacent forest. Settling onto a stout branch, Nathan activated his jutsu, wind-style, wind wings, and felt the rush of chakra feathers sprouting along his arms. He shaped a series of precise hand seals and invoked the shadow clone technique. With a sudden burst of chakra smoke, 6 perfect duplicates materialized around him, each poised and ready for the coming fight. Nathan issued silent orders, dispatching one of his shadow clones to take over the reconnaissance mission. He had no intention of confronting the Mist Ninja this time. By keeping to higher altitudes, he was well out of their reach. One clone would do the job. There was no point in draining all his chakra here. With the remaining hours, Nathan planned to run intensive training drills with his 5 shadow clones on the Earth style, hardening technique, pushing it to level 4. It wasn't out of the question. Only 300 mastery points remained, and at 5 times normal training speed, they could wrap it up quickly. True, level 4 hardening technique didn't represent a qualitative breakthrough and might struggle in very complex scenarios, but it was more than adequate for everyday combat. And once they'd succeeded, it would give him an extra layer of defense in any upcoming battles. Though frankly, he didn't believe the Mist Ninjas stood a chance against him. But as for Dejia, he really meant business. Satisfied with the plan, Nathan dismissed his doubts and, along with the 5 clones, swiftly departed. On the other side, Nathan hovered above the Mist Ninjas' column, surveying their every move. At first, the warriors exchanged relieved glances when he vanished from sight, but that relief proved short-lived. No sooner had they settled back into formation than Nathan reappeared overhead, and anxiety rippled through the ranks. They still remembered how he had harassed their support troops 2 nights ago. Although they'd brought more men this time and felt ready for his aerial assaults, they didn't want to squander any more time on his provocations. Fortunately, Nathan showed no intention of diving in for another close-quarters showdown. He simply drifted high above them, a silent, watchful specter. Satisfied that he posed no immediate threat, the Mist Ninja leader barked an order to advance. The warriors tightened their formation and surged forward once more. 20 minutes later, they reached the edge of a dense forest. From Nathan's lofty vantage, the trees formed an impenetrable roof of green. He hesitated to descend. One slip could leave him vulnerable to hidden archers waiting below. Yet by remaining aloft, he risked losing sight of the column altogether. As the wind rustled through the treetops, Nathan weighed his options: ride the currents or brave the cover of leaves and risk ambush. Nathan closed his eyes and invoked his heart-to-heart technique, reaching out to Hinata Maple Leaf, Hyuga Fengye, and the rest of the team. In concise mental images, he laid out the Mist Ninjas' last known positions and explained their new roles. Hinata and Fengye would take point on reconnaissance. Nathan himself would coordinate from above, directing their movements and maintaining the big-picture view. No sooner had the message left his mind than Hyuga Fengye and the others sprang into action. Fengye activated her Byakugan, sweeping the forest floor for the faintest signs of the enemy, while Hinata released a squad of her insect scouts, their chittering wings carrying them silently through the underbrush. Every scrap of intelligence, an enemy patrol's direction of travel, the glint of water in their canteens, shifts in their chakra signatures, was relayed instantly back to Nathan. From his vantage point high in the treetops, Nathan traced those reports like lines on a map. Whenever the Mist Ninja altered course or broke into a run, Nathan recalibrated, shifting his own position and pointing his comrades toward the new trail. It was seamless teamwork, ground-level eyes feeding sky-level strategy guiding the ground team's next steps. Over an hour slipped by in this rhythm of observation and pursuit. Then, on the far side of the forest, Nathan's shadow clone, tasked with screening the rear, sent him a crisp telepathic alert. The Mist Ninja were approaching the valley's edge. The moment had come. Nathan sat up, breathing in the damp, earthy air. This valley, he reminded himself, was exactly where he'd arranged the ambush with Sano Nobuhisa. "Everyone, move in," he commanded quietly. "They'll be here any second." With that, the pieces fell into place. The trap was set. All that remained was to wait and strike. Sano Nobuhisa and the others reached the valley just ahead of the Mist Ninja's advance. With the enemy so close, the battle was about to begin, and Nathan knew it was time to gather his strength. He formed the familiar hand seals and released his 5 shadow clones. In an instant, they dissolved into streams of chakra, each carrying back every scrap of training data and memory from the past hour to his body. Nathan closed his eyes and entered a state of deep concentration, methodically digesting the influx of experience until it translated into pure proficiency. Minutes ticked by in silence. Then, with a soft exhale, he reopened his eyes, and a spark of triumph danced in their depths. His Earth Escape, hardening technique, had just reached 300 proficiency points and been upgraded to level 4. Without hesitation, Nathan moved through the seals again, activating his newly strengthened jutsu. His pale skin darkened instantly, shifting to a solid, gray-black hue that resembled polished stone. Satisfied, he squared his shoulders and prepared to join the fray, ready to prove just how far his training could take him. Nathan tapped his forearm and was surprised by how solid it felt. Curious, he drew a kunai from his ninja pouch and dragged its edge firmly across his skin. The blade skittered with a high-pitched screech, yet it left no cut, only a faint white streak. He realized that ordinary weapons could no longer wound him. Focusing his chakra, Nathan activated Earth Escape, hardening technique. His body stiffened under the armor of chakra, then settled into a relaxed but resilient form. He frowned. Although the level 4 hardening technique offered a significant boost to his defense, it robbed him of some agility, and at his current proficiency, it took 2 to 3 seconds to channel. In the chaos of a real fight, he might never have the luxury of those precious seconds. He let out a soft sigh, reminding himself that progress, even incremental, was still progress. Concentrating again, he wove chakra into a second jutsu. Wind Escape, Wind Wings. Moments later, translucent wings of swirling air sprouted from his back. With a powerful flap, Nathan lifted off and soared toward the valley below, ready to put his new skills to the test. Chapter 450, Luring the Enemy, and Confidence. 10 minutes earlier. On the far side of the valley, the Mist Shinobi team emerged from the jungle's edge. Just as they were about to descend into the clearing, one of them stopped and turned to his companion. "How long has it been since the recon squad checked in?" he asked, voice low and tense. His partner glanced at his wrist console, brow furrowing. "About 17 minutes. A flicker of alarm passed over the first ninja's face. By regulation, any scouting party must report back every 15 minutes. In an emergency, they could send updates more often, but never less. They were now 2 minutes overdue. Barring a miraculous timekeeping error, a near impossibility, the only explanation was that their forward team was in trouble. And in this hostile territory, in trouble could mean any number of deadly threats. In an instant, both mist-hidden shinobi looked up. High above them, a small dark shape hovered, circling the clearing like a vulture. Neither of them mistook it for a bird or insect. This was Uchiha Nathan, the Konoha ninja nicknamed the Ghost Sword. It was obvious now that they'd been watched the entire time. Their forward reconnaissance team had gone silent, and everyone knew what that meant. Konoha had struck. Without a second thought, the first Kirigakure ninja slammed his palm against his thigh and barked, "Hold positions. Don't advance another step." At his command, the entire squad froze, weapons half drawn, eyes darting through the misty forest. A tense quiet fell over them. Footsteps rustled through the undergrowth as several shinobi hurried forward and formed a loose circle around their captain, Yasuda Akiju. One of them spoke up, voice tight with concern. "Captain, what's the situation?" Yasuda met their gaze and didn't soften the blow. "Our recon team hasn't reported back. Communications went dead moments ago." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the group. Every face around him registered the same grim certainty. Konoha was behind this, and if the Ghost Sword was here, things were about to get very dangerous. "Why don't we send another team to scout ahead?" one shinobi suggested. Before he could finish, another cut in. "One squad isn't enough. If we send more, at least they won't all fall at once." Heads around the planning table nodded in agreement. Indeed, if the first reconnaissance party had already been wiped out by Leaf Shinobi, a single squad would be putting lives on the line needlessly. Dispatched in strength, however, even if they encountered a foe beyond their power, at least someone would have a chance to slip back with word of what stood in the valley, giving Kirigakure time to prepare. Captain Yasuda Akiju barely hesitated. "Very well," he said. "We'll send 6 teams, 2 each to the left, center, and right approaches." Moments later, 12 Kirigakure ninja slipped silently into the bamboo forest, fanning out along the 3 trails that wound down into the canyon. At first, all was quiet, too quiet. Then, from the right-hand path, came a thunderous crack. The blast shattered wood and sent leaves raining down, the unmistakable roar of an exploding tag. Captain Yasuda's eyes lit up. "They've triggered our signal," he said, voice tight with anticipation. "Good. That means they've reached the target zone." As the ground still trembled, the remaining Kirigakure teams crowded forward, each clutching their kunai and sealing their forehead protectors. They would have their answer soon enough, and whatever awaited them in the valley, they were ready. Across the ridge, Sano Nobuhisa heard the distant explosion and immediately recognized that a perfect ambush was out of the question. In truth, he had never expected such a plan to succeed. This stretch of terrain simply wasn't suited for a trap that relied on complete surprise. If the Kirigakure ninjas had exercised even a modicum of caution, they would never have been caught off guard. So why had they blundered in so hastily? The answer was clear. Control of this valley is a priceless advantage. It lay on the only direct route between Feiyu Town and Heishi Town. A straight crossing was swift, but any detour, no matter how fast the ninja, added at least 30 extra minutes to the journey. True enough, the Kirigakure forces hadn't rushed right into the kill zone, and that half-step of prudence blunted the ambush's full impact. But Sano wasn't ready to concede defeat. There was still a way to lure the enemy deeper between the cliffs. Feiyu Town's mist ninjas had split into 2 columns for this operation, advancing in tandem so they could strike from both flanks. Such a plan demanded flawless timing, and if he could disrupt their coordination, the valley would become a battlefield on his own terms. By forcing the mist ninjas into the valley, there was nowhere for them to circle around, and no chance for them to linger indefinitely. Sano Nobuhisa had already calculated the odds. Even if the mist sensed something was wrong, their pride would compel them to press on, albeit more cautiously. His task was to steer them right into his trap. "Sayo Aoi," he called softly to Yamanaka Aoi at his side. "Alert the other teams. Execute the plan." The directive was simple. The bulk of their forces would remain hidden, holding position in silence. Only a small detachment would stage a skirmish, just enough to convince the mist ninjas that only 1 or 2 Konoha squads were in the valley. Then, once the enemy committed their full strength, the hidden troops would spring from concealment. True to Sano's prediction, the mist recon unit was repelled almost immediately. Rather than retreat, their commander, Akiku Yasuda, sent in fresh reinforcements, determined to break through whatever lay ahead. The real battle was about to begin. After confirming there were only a few Konoha squads inside the fortress, Commander Yasuda Akiju ordered his entire unit to press forward. He knew Konoha might be trying to lure them deeper into enemy territory, but there was no time for hesitation. When you hold overwhelming strength, all enemy schemes become little more than distractions, and right now, Yasuda was confident his side held that advantage. They didn't have detailed blueprints of the Blackstone Fortress, but after the last engagement, they already had a solid estimate of Konoha's remaining forces. Even if the enemy sprang an ambush, they could roughly gauge the size of the attacking force. And even in the worst case, when every available Konoha ninja inside the fortress joined the assault, Yasuda's men could hold out for an hour or 2. That would be all the time the naval contingent needed to breach the fortress defenses, link up with Yasuda's team, and wipe out the Konoha attackers once and for all. If they avoid running into Konoha's ambush, everything goes according to plan. No need to worry about those small scouting parties in the forest. They'll reach the valley on schedule. Then, with both forces striking the Blackstone stronghold at once, the fortress will fall for sure. In every scenario, victory is all but guaranteed. That's why Yasuda Akiku strode straight into the valley without a second thought, and exactly what Sano Nobuhisa was banking on. Both sides are brimming with confidence, but Sano's faith rests squarely on Nathan, a jonin whose power far outstrips any ordinary rank. As for Yasuda Akiku, he seems to have overlooked one critical question. What if they can't hold out long enough? Chapter 451, First Kill. As the Kirigakure column filed into the valley, Commander Yasuda Chuju wasted no time. He ordered his force split into 3 detachments. 2 teams, each led by a seasoned jonin, slipped silently into the jungle along the valley's flanks. Chuju himself guided the main body straight down the center. This formation would ensure that even if Konoha shinobi sprung an ambush from the trees, the flanking squads could buy precious seconds for the heart of the army to react. Their plan worked to perfection. No sooner had Chuju's center reached the valley's midpoint than Sano Nobuhisa's voice rang out. Attack! In an instant, Konoha operatives discarded their camouflage and charged from both sides under their jonin leaders. Blades and chakra flares cut through Kirigakure scouts, but just as the enemy burst into the open, the two flanking detachments closed in, intercepting them before they could reach Chuju's main force. The hoped-for element of surprise fizzled against the Mist Ninja's coordinated defense. Unperturbed, Commander Chuju calmly assessed the situation. His troops, supported by steady hand and sharp planning, repelled the ambush without faltering. The first wave of attackers lay broken, and somewhere beyond the shadowed tree line, Nathan watched, ready for what came next. Nathan's first order wasn't to send the Mist Ninjas in the valley to reinforce the flanks. Instead, he dispatched a messenger to the naval detachment en route from the sea, urging them to press on at top speed and strike Blackstone's stronghold without delay. Once that directive was sent, he turned his attention to the troops at his back, instructing them to divide into two detachments and bolster the friendly units fighting their way through the jungle on either side of the valley. As his reinforcements slipped into position, the fleeing Mist Ninjas abruptly halted their retreat and reformed their battle line halfway up the mountain. The valley erupted into a cacophony of conflict, the clatter of kunai clashing against kunai, the thunderous booms of exploding seals, and the anguished cries of wounded shinobi echoing off the rock walls. It was bedlam incarnate, every sight and sound a testament to the ferocity of the engagement. Nathan stepped into the chaos and closed his eyes for a moment. With a single, focused thought, he dispelled his shadow clone technique. The illusory figure hurtling toward him flickered and vanished, and in that instant a torrent of memories rushed into Nathan's mind, images and insights he had long buried, now flooding back with startling clarity. Nathan understood immediately what was happening, and exactly what Sano Nobuhisa wanted from him. "Huh? So I'm just the heavy hitter?" he muttered under his breath, though his face betrayed nothing. He'd guessed as much the moment they'd invited him on this ambush mission. They needed someone to neutralize the enemy's highest caliber fighters. He'd accepted for exactly that reason, otherwise he wouldn't have shown up at all. He dropped his altitude, skirting the treetops as he surveyed the clearing. There he saw two Kirigakure Jonin closing in on a lone shinobi from Konohagakure. One moved with the assured precision of a true Jonin. The other's technique was good, but not quite at that level. He was likely a special-grade Jonin at best. Without hesitation, Nathan zeroed in on the weaker opponent, diving for a swift takedown. The attack came in a heartbeat, but even in that split second, the shinobi braced himself, ready to react. Nathan's kunai whistled through the air, aimed straight for his opponent's heart. "A perceptive ninja, huh?" he murmured, twisting his body just in time to let the blade pass harmlessly by. He followed up at once, hurling a volley of shuriken designed either to seal off every escape route or strike at vital points, lethal attacks, all of them. But the Mist Shinobi stayed unnervingly calm. With a flick of his wrist, he drew a second kunai from his belt and knocked the first shuriken aside. His form blurred as he spun away from the ray, sane of the blades, each one grazing the air where he had just stood. Nathan realized with a jolt that this man must be a special Jonin, gifted with uncanny perception. No ordinary ninja could evade his assault so effortlessly. Still, retreat was not an option. The distance between them shrank at a frightening pace. Before Nathan could rethink his strategy, they were less than 5 meters apart. He drew his long blade in one smooth motion, and gathering all his strength, brought it slashing down toward the Mist Shinobi's head. Clang! The resonant ring of metal on metal echoed through the clearing. Sparks flew, and for a moment, neither man moved. Then Nathan saw Hasiichiro's arm tremble, his stance falter. The blade hadn't cut deep, but the impact was enough. Ichiro's arm went numb, and Nathan pressed the advantage, ready to strike again. Nathan's blow was relentless. Even with Hasiichiro's expertly cast force-relieving technique cracking the earth beneath him like a spider's web, he couldn't stem the attack. A droplet of blood traced a dark line down Nathan's blade as Hasiichiro glanced at the shallow slash across his shoulder. His eyes hardened. With a grunt, he drove his heel into the ground and rocketed backward, moving like a cannonball. Nathan responded without hesitation, whispering the activation words of Wind Escape. Wind wings, a swath of green energy unfurled around him. In the next heartbeat, he vanished in a flash of light, instant sword technique, and surged after his opponent. Steel rang again as knives met. Nathan's longsword struck Ichiro's kunai, forcing the shinobi to stumble back several paces. Nathan didn't pause. "You're wounded, and I don't intend to let you live," he thought, stepping in to finish the fight. He swung his blade in a vicious arc, aiming straight for Ichiro's neck. A cold knot of fear tightened in Ichiro's chest. He brought his kunai up in a desperate block as Nathan's knife descended. The two weapons collided with a brutal clang, neither man willing to yield. Clang! Another metallic ring cracked through the air, but this time it was over in an instant. As Ichiro's kunai collided with Nathan's blade, Nathan slipped his sword free and in one fluid motion drove it diagonally toward Ichiro's throat. The earlier parry had been nothing more than a feint. This was the real killing blow. Ichiro felt the murderous intent radiating from Nathan's sword and watched in horror as the tip inched closer. Instinct and superhuman reflex saved him. He threw his head back, narrowly avoiding impalement, but couldn't escape without injury. Nathan's longsword slashed across his cheek, carving a jagged scar from his left jaw up to his right eye. A burning pain shot through him, but there was no time to check the wound. Nathan pressed the advantage, stepping forward for another strike. Unable to meet him head-on, Ichiro raised his kunai in a desperate guard and staggered backward, bracing himself for the next onslaught. Bang! A searing pain shot through Ichiro's back. He spun around to see a gnarled tree trunk blocking his only escape. Nathan's longsword was already descending. Instinctively, Ichiro dropped low and pressed himself beneath the thick branch. With a thunderous crack, Nathan's blade cleaved the wood in two, but that split-second delay was all Ichiro needed. He completed the final hand seal faster than ever before and unleashed the substitution technique, just as Nathan's sword sliced through the air. Poof! A spray of water erupted as Ichiro rematerialized in a shallow puddle. Nathan retracted his blade without expression. A faint green aura shimmered around him as he readied the instant sword technique once more. Then, sheathing his sword with a soft hiss, he said quietly, "That's enough for today." Chapter 452, Fierce Battle in the Valley. Ichiro reeled back, his breath ragged as he narrowly escaped Nathan's last stroke. Before he could find his footing, a silent shimmer of steel materialized inches from his throat. Nathan stood there, expression calm, blade poised for the kill. A chill of dread shot through Ichiro's veins. Without warning, Nathan shifted his stance and launched another attack. The sword moved so fluidly it seemed to blur in midair, a signature of the instant sword technique at its finest. Ichiro barely managed to block the blow, sparks flying as steel met steel. Nathan's mastery of the instant sword technique had soared in the past 48 hours. 2 days ago, he'd been about halfway through level 6 proficiency. Now, after an intense sparring session and non-stop drills, he'd pushed that rating to over 80%, perilously close to level 7, the threshold of near-perfect execution. Every slash and parry felt smoother, the weapon an extension of his arm. It was this refined skill that had driven Ichiro to the brink so quickly. Yet Nathan knew that raw swordplay alone wouldn't finish the fight. If he wanted to kill Ichiro, he'd have to unleash something even deadlier, an unexpected move he'd reserved for a moment just like this. As the wind whipped through the valley, carrying the echoes of clashing steel off the rocky walls, Nathan tightened his grip and prepared to spring his final gambit. Nathan's eyes locked onto Ichiro's, and in that instant, he unleashed his illusion, Sharingan. A surge of chakra laced with mental energy shot through the connection, aiming to invade Ichiro's mind, scramble his senses, and finish him off. But Ichiro was no ordinary shinobi. His perceptive skills were legendary. Mid-cast, he sensed something was wrong and snapped his eyes shut. At the same time, he didn't break his guard. Relying on pure instinct and muscle memory, he flung a kunai toward Nathan. Their weapons collided with a sharp clang of steel. Nathan's longsword met the incoming kunai and ground to a halt. Ichiro, well aware he couldn't outmatch Nathan in a direct melee, and cautious of falling victim to the Sharingan's illusion, held back just enough. By redirecting Nathan's forward momentum through the kunai, he forced Nathan's blade aside and used the recoil to spring backward, putting precious distance between them. Nathan didn't give Ichiro a chance. The moment Ichiro closed his eyes, Nathan eased his grip on his sword, stepped forward in a single stride, and snapped his left palm into place. Without warning, a swirling orb of pale blue chakra, his signature Rasengan, blossomed in his hand. Agonizing pain ripped through Ichiro's side. He shot his eyes open, coughed up a mouthful of blood, and collapsed to his knees, winded and gasping. The technique wasn't new. The Rasengan was a well-known unmarked ninjutsu, but at Mastery Level 7, Nathan's version was uniquely concealed and explosively powerful. Only a handful of shinobi could hope to defend against it, and Haseichiro was clearly not one of them. Nathan met Haseichiro's glare for a heartbeat, then tilted his head just enough to dodge the spray of arterial blood. Focusing every ounce of his will, he activated his Sharingan and wove a powerful genjutsu. Rich scarlet tomoe blossomed across Ichiro's vision, paralyzing him instantly. By the time Ichiro realized he was trapped, it was too late. With a swift, fluid motion, Nathan drew his blade and slit Ichiro's throat. A strangled gasp tore the jonin from the illusion. Pain and shock wrenched at his lungs as he clawed at the ground. A hollow, defeated laugh slipped from his lips. 2 staggering steps later, his knees buckled, and he collapsed in a heavy final thud. Nathan spared Ichiro's body a single cold glance before shifting his gaze across the battlefield. His eyes locked onto the mist shinobi who had aided him in dispatching the Konoha Jonin, ready for whatever came next. Swish! A brilliant flash of green streaked through the air as Nathan unleashed his instant T-sword technique, vanishing and reappearing in the blink of an eye as he sprinted toward his next target. Not far away, Ito Changping, still reeling from Nathan's swift defeat of Haseichiro, had already split his attention between his own Konoha Jonin opponent and this new threat. His heart pounded the harder for it. If Nathan reached him, he'd be sandwiched between 2 deadly shinobi. Determined to avoid that trap, Changping resolved to put some distance between himself and the Jonin first, then deal with Nathan later. But the Konoha Jonin wasn't about to let him slip away. Sensing Changping's hesitation, the Jonin intensified his assault, hammering him with relentless strikes. He even resorted to a desperate technique that would risk injury to both users, anything to keep Changping from making his escape. Now Changping found himself in a true bind. Stay, and he'd be crushed between 2 opponents. Flee, and he'd likely suffer a serious wound, an outcome no shinobi wants on the battlefield. Gripping his weapon, he weighed his options. Every second counted. After a brief, wrenching hesitation, he chose to stand his ground, and Nathan's promised warning never came. Instead, the true danger was the Konoha Jonin's furious assault bearing down on him, and he was forced to counter that attack first. In that critical moment of distraction, Nathan closed the distance. Without even pausing to draw a deep breath, Nathan plunged into the fray and, side by side with the Jonin, swarmed Ito Changping. Changping had always been a middling shinobi. Even a one-on-one against a Jonin would have tested his limits. Now, trapped between 2 relentless opponents, his fate was sealed. Within minutes, fatigue was dragging him under. Seizing the opportunity, Nathan slashed out with his kunai, carving a shallow nick across Changping's right forearm. It barely cut the skin, but it was enough to tip the balance. From that moment on, Changping was forced entirely onto the defensive, arms whipping up to fend off blow after blow as bruises and cuts blossomed across his body, each strike stealing another ragged gasp of breath. Realizing he was on the verge of being cut down, Nathan wondered whether Yasuda Akiku had finally adjusted her strategy or only just noticed how dire things had become. In any case, reinforcements arrived. 2 Kirigakure Jonin. Nathan barely spared them a glance. With a single motion, he tossed Ito Changping toward the nearby Konoha Jonin and pivoted to face the newcomers. No words were exchanged. Steel met steel the instant they clashed. Swords and kunai rang out in rapid succession, sparks flying with each collision. Nathan scarcely needed to call on ninjutsu. His masterful swordsmanship, amplified by the Sharingan, drove the 2 Jonin onto the defensive. They blocked and parried, but rarely dared to strike back, and a defense that never turns into offense is bound to crack. Bolstered by a 19-point physique attribute that granted him far greater endurance than most, Nathan pressed the assault. After a series of fierce exchanges, he could feel their openings growing more pronounced by the second. Seizing the moment, Nathan poured every ounce of his strength into activating his Genjutsu Sharingan, forcing one opponent to stagger back. Then, shoulder burning with pain, he drove home a crushing blow against another Kirigakure Jonin. Chapter 453, Killing in Circumstance. Swish! Nathan's blade sliced cleanly through flesh and bone, carving a deep, ragged gash across the Jonin's chest so severe that his ribs showed through. The Kirigakure Jonin screamed in pain, yanked the kunai loose from his shoulder, and stumbled backward. Nathan allowed himself a curt nod as he glanced at the shallow wound on his own arm, the remnant of an earlier throw. Then, confident, he stepped forward to deliver the final blow. But the wounded Jonin, roused by Nathan's Genjutsu Sharingan, lunged back into the fray and blocked his advance. A second kunai shot toward Nathan's midsection. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. Then Nathan snapped his long sword up, intercepting the kunai with a sharp clang. Metal rang against metal as sword and kunai locked. Sparks flared where steel scraped steel. Neither warrior yielded. They pushed against each other, wills as strong as the blades they wielded. At last, with a mutual, measured breath, they each released the pressure and stepped back, eyes narrowed as they reassessed the other's next move. Nathan surged forward, his longsword slicing through the dusky air. In an instant, he and his opponent crashed together with a ringing clang of steel. They recoiled at the same moment, only to collide again in a blur of motion. Clang, 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 metal on metal echoing across the clearing. The mist, hidden ninja before him, guarded fiercely, every parry fueled by desperation. Though he matched Nathan's speed, his stance was strictly defensive, and Nathan could feel his advantage tipping the scales. From the corner of his eye, Nathan spotted the other ninja, wounded across the chest, staggering back to nurse his injury. A fleeting thought told him it would have been interesting to finish off both adversaries at once, but the injured man was already out of the fight. With renewed focus, Nathan concentrated on the single remaining foe. Freed from the distraction of a second opponent, he pressed the assault relentlessly. Within minutes, the ninja's defenses shattered. Nathan's blade carved several deep scars across his armor and flesh. When the final clang of steel met stillness, Nathan stood unbroken. Not only had he avoided fresh wounds, but the shallow cut on his shoulder, inflicted earlier, was already closing, as if healing itself with the passing moments. Nathan smiled inwardly. This was precisely why he'd been willing to use himself as bait, to create openings, and now it looked like he could pull the same trick again. In the next clash, he poured every ounce of strength into his strikes, all the while conspicuously leaving chinks in his defense. Yet the Mist Ninja never took the bait. Whether from caution or because he'd seen through Nathan's ploy, he refused every invitation to counterattack. Nathan felt a flicker of frustration, but his superior skill and stamina still gave him the edge. Even without taking risks, the ninja simply couldn't match him. For several more minutes, Nathan pressed the assault. Blow after blow rained down, each one forcing the Mist Ninja to backpedal, his breaths growing heavier and more ragged. Nathan could hear the labored rasp of each exhale as fatigue began to stiffen his opponent's limbs. Then, in a fleeting instant, Nathan spotted his chance. He gathered every last ounce of chakra, drove his boots into the ground, and blasted forward at top speed. In the blink of an eye, he crossed the distance and stood face to face with the beleaguered ninja, ready to end the fight. Shimizu Kenta barely had time to register Nathan's sudden appearance before lunging forward, thrusting his kunai toward Nathan's throat. But Nathan's Sharingan saw the attack coming from the very start. He'd anticipated this move, and Shimizu's reaction fell neatly within his prediction, so he stepped aside with calm precision. Shimizu Kenta, caught off guard by Nathan's burst of speed, drove the kunai home a split second too late. In battle, fractions of a second can decide everything. As the blade whistled past his throat, Nathan countered, and in one fluid motion, he swung his long sword in a wide arc. A pale blue vortex of wind chakra spiraled along the blade, the gathered currents crackling as they met the air. With a sharp hiss, the enchanted edge sliced across Shimizu Kenta's neck. The opponent threw himself backward to avoid the worst of it, but the wind-charged blade had already drawn a deep, searing cut. Shimizu Kenta staggered, crimson staining his collar as Nathan's eyes darkened with resolve. Blood exploded from Kenta Shimizu's neck in an instant. He staggered back 2 steps, clutching at the wound, but it was hopeless. Nathan's sword, guided by the Sharingan's razor-sharp insight, had severed his carotid artery and cut through his throat. The twin injuries unleashed massive blood loss and choked off his air. Without a medical ninja of Tsunade's caliber on hand, survival was out of the question. And none such existed on this battlefield. Nathan didn't watch Shimizu's final convulsions. He turned his gaze instead to the Konoha Jonin, who had nearly finished off Ito Shohei and was already sprinting toward another clash nearby. With a silent exhalation, Nathan sprang into the trees. A few lithe bounds later, he perched atop the highest branch. From that vantage point, he surveyed the chaos below, every muscle coiled and ready for what came next. Nathan stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, his cloak whipping in the cold mountain wind. Below him, the 2 armies clashed in a chaotic melee. The stout defensive line the Mist forces had built halfway up the slope lay in ruins. Splintered timber and shattered stone marked its collapse. Now, foot soldiers and shinobi from both sides surged together in a brutal scramble for every yard of ground. Thanks to Konoha's meticulous preparations, Nathan's comrades held a narrow advantage. Fresh supplies, carefully laid ambushes, and well-timed reinforcements gave the Leaf forces the upper hand, at least for now. But the tide of battle remained far from decisive. The Mist shinobi, though battered, fought with desperate resolve. Neither side could claim total dominance. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he considered their broader predicament. If this grinding stalemate dragged on, it would play straight into Yasuda Akiju's trap. The enemy commander's plan was simple and cruel. Stall Konoha long enough for a second Kirigakure detachment to sweep down on the Blackstone stronghold, then join with the main force to crush any survivors. It was a high-stakes gamble, but under the present conditions, entirely plausible. Across the dark waters below, Admiral Sano Nobuhisa had dispatched swift skiffs to harass the Mist reinforcements as they attempted to land. But the sea lanes were vast, and the enemy slipped through every patrol. Once those fresh troops reached the stronghold, its current garrison, already stretched thin defending frontline positions, would barely be able to hold their walls. Nathan's jaw clenched. Time was running out. If Konoha didn't press its advantage now, if they hesitated even a moment longer, the Mist's trap would spring. And the cost of turning back the second wave at the ruined Blackstone stronghold might be far greater than anyone was willing to pay. He lifted his hand, signaling his squad to advance. They had to break the stalemate here and now, before darkness fell, and before Yasuda Akiju's gamble became their undoing. Nathan knew that if the enemy managed to strike from both flanks, the outcome would be disastrous. This battle couldn't drag on, and that was precisely why he was here. With that resolve, he dropped from the treetop and charged straight at a Kirigakure Jonin who was locked in a fierce exchange with a Konoha counterpart. Thanks to Sano Nobuhisa's decision to redeploy nearly all available Jonin to the front lines, there were almost no Kirigakure reinforcements left idle on the battlefield. Nathan could move freely, confident that no hidden enemy would close in on him. Free at last to unleash his full strength, he pressed the attack, and that strategic advantage was exactly what Sano Nobuhisa had counted on. Chapter 454, The Last Straw. A hiss of steel cutting through the air, Nathan's blade flashed. He drove his knife deep into the back of a Mist ninja, who froze at the sudden pain. Determined not to go down alone, the wounded shinobi yanked a detonating talisman from his belt and pressed it against his palm. "Explosive tag! Watch out!" The Konoha Jonin next to Nathan shouted, stepping back with a grimace. Nathan didn't hesitate. He kicked off with his toe, drawing his long sword in one smooth motion, and vaulted clear as the world erupted behind him. A thunderous boom rocked the clearing, and scarlet flames roared to life, swallowing the fallen ninja's body and licking hungrily at the undergrowth. The blast wave crashed outward, but its blast radius was limited. Nathan and the Jonin at his side braced, hands raised like shields, and rode out the shock. Sparks and embers danced overhead, but neither shinobi suffered so much as a singed brow. When the echo of the explosion finally died away, they stood in silence, chests heaving, dust settling around them. The Mist ninja was gone, consumed by his own trap, his final act of defiance, cutting no deeper than the scorched earth beneath their feet. Once the dust settled, they exchanged a knowing glance. Without a word, each of them broke off and sprinted in a different direction. It had been over 20 minutes since Nathan tore free of his restraints and unleashed his full strength. In that time, he'd come to the aid of his fellow Konoha Jonin and cut down 3 Kirigakure operatives, dramatically shifting the balance in Konoha's favor. The reason was simple. Every foe Nathan eliminated was the equivalent of freeing an ally of equal prowess, who could then join another Jonin's squad. Even if these rescued shinobi couldn't match Nathan's raw power, they could still dispatch enemies quickly, liberate more teammates, and ensure they wouldn't be overwhelmed. At the same time, they made it harder for the Kirigakure Jonin to break free. That bought Nathan precious seconds to press his assault, slaying yet more opponents. It was a snowball effect. Each victory fed the next, and through his relentless onslaught, Nathan single-handedly revived Konoha's faltering fortunes. It was only a matter of time before Kirigakure's defenses gave way. Every Jonin Nathan cut down hastened the village's collapse. Soon enough, Konoha's own Jonin could combine their strength and finish off any remaining Kirigakure Jonin without needing Nathan's help, and that would mark the beginning of the end for the Mist Village. When that moment came, nothing could save the surviving Kirigakure forces. If Nathan redirected his attention to the Chunin and Jinin, or if Konoha's Jonin pressed the attack themselves, the remnants of Kirigakure's middle and lower-ranked shinobi would be utterly overwhelmed. Neither Nathan, the super-tier Jonin, nor his Konoha comrades could be matched by those underpowered opponents. Collapse was inevitable, and it was drawing near faster than anyone in Kiri dared admit. At first glance, Kirigakure's assault looked fierce, but in reality their forces were split into 2 separate teams, and that division weakened both. Although countless Chunin and Genin swarmed the battlefield, their Jonin leadership was a shadow of what it had been just days earlier, outclassed and outmatched at every turn. In the end, their combined losses would prove too heavy to bear. Kirigakure's downfall was no longer a distant threat. It was right on the horizon. Nathan and the 3 elite shinobi of the Snow Clan had quietly shadowed Ozawa Yuki from the sea to the Blackstone stronghold. Inside the fortress, the resident Jonin weren't especially numerous or exceptionally powerful, but Sano Nobuhisa had mustered nearly all of them for this ambush. As reinforcements shifted the balance, what had begun as a roughly even match tipped decisively in Nathan's favor once he cut down 5 mist ninjas in rapid succession and gravely wounded a 6th. Now the question hung in the air. Which of Nathan's comrades would deliver the final, crushing blow against the struggling mist forces? Scanning the battlefield, Nathan fixed his gaze on one particularly lethal enemy. The ninja wore his tunic, ripped open to bare shoulders bristling with bone-like spikes, and brandished a serrated sword carved from bone. He moved with an eerie, dance-like grace, relentlessly assaulting Uchiha Shisui. Yes, Shisui himself had been drawn into this trap. With battle lines drawn and both sides straining to seize control, Nathan steeled himself for the next strike. Whoever landed it would decide the outcome of this deadly skirmish. Nathan recognized his assailant the moment he struck. Although he couldn't name him, the faint network of veins beneath the man's eyes and the fluid, deadly way he moved gave him away as a Hyuga shinobi from the Hidden Mist Village. The techniques he used, Willow Dance and Camellia Dance, 2 of the Hyuga clan's 6 secret art forms, showcased agility and speed beyond that of any ordinary ninja. Yet Nathan wasn't intimidated. He'd already faced stronger Hyuga warriors and killed 2 of them. Confident in his own skills, he slid to the edge of the skirmish, bided his time, and then sprang into action. Before Nathan joined the fray, Uchiha Shisui and Hyuga Kotaro were evenly matched. Now, with Shisui's Sharingan complemented by Nathan's own, the balance tipped decisively. Kotaro's composure wavered under the strain of facing 2 Sharingan at once, an ordeal no Hyuga ninja relishes. Sensing their adversary's advantage, Shisui and Nathan pressed their attack. Nathan never expected the Kaguya clan to strike first today. Even if their opponents would have chosen otherwise, the confrontation was already underway. Facing a Kaguya shinobi, he drew his sword without hesitation, angling it for a lethal strike at the ninja's unguarded back. The air around the blade's edge crackled with deadly intent. Kotaro Kaguya might not have seen the attack, but he certainly felt the menace. The timing was flawless. Kotaro had no chance to raise his guard. His only option was to dodge, which would leave him at a severe disadvantage. And with Uchiha Shisui's Sharingan locked onto him, Kotaro risked being pinned by Shisui's counterstrike and dispatched by Nathan in mere moments. It was evident the Kaguya clan had anticipated this gambit. Rather than evade, Kotaro allowed Shisui's blade to graze his side, then channeled his chakra into a forbidden technique, the Karamatsu dance. In the next instant, he became a living gyroscope, spinning with dizzying speed. Nathan and Uchiha Shisui barely had time to react before razor-sharp bone spurs erupted from the ground, hurtling toward them like missiles. Shisui's 3 Magatama Sharingan flared as he tracked the volley, but Kaguya Kotaro's speed was blinding. Shisui could do little more than leap aside and pray he wasn't caught off guard. Nathan, for his part, activated his Mangekyo Sharingan, clearing every blind spot, but in the midst of Kotaro's onslaught, he couldn't safely unleash its true power. All he could do was dodge, darting out of the cutting arcs of bone. One misstep, and he'd be shredded to pieces. Kotaro pressed the advantage relentlessly, his body spinning like a monstrous chainsaw. Every revolution sent fresh spurs of bone slicing through the air, carving deep gouges in the earth. Shisui twisted his body just in time as another spike slammed into the stone behind him, while Nathan vaulted atop a crater's rim, the wind of Kotaro's spin ruffling his hair. At a glance, it looked as if the two defenders were trapped on their heels, repelling wave after wave of furious attacks. Yet neither face betrayed panic. They both understood the truth. Kotaro's furious flurry, powered by his Kaguya bloodline, could not be sustained forever, and when that tempest of bone and chakra finally ebbed, the initiative would fall to Nathan and Shisui. In that fleeting instant of exhaustion, they would decide whether to strike back with equal ferocity or hold their positions and force Kotaro to make the next move. The outcome of this battle hinged on that single opportunity, and both young shinobi were determined not to let it slip away. Neither of them was in any hurry. They simply waited patiently for the right moment. Chapter 455, Breaking the Limit and Killing Nathan's prediction proved accurate. After driving himself into a manic frenzy, Kaguya Kotaro finally ground to a halt, spent from the exertion. Still, the legendary stamina of the Kaguya clan meant he'd soon recover if granted even a brief respite. 60 seconds or 2 at most. But neither Nathan nor Uchiha Shisui would afford him that luxury. Almost the instant Kotaro's Karamatsu dance came to a stop, Shisui unleashed his signature instant body technique. In the blink of an eye, he vanished and reappeared directly in front of Kotaro, moving so swiftly that any normal observer would have missed him entirely. Shisui's hand flung a kunai toward Kotaro's throat with lethal intent. Kotaro had tangled with Shisui long enough to recognize his style and speed, and he'd kept himself braced for just such a strike. Though the kunai sliced the air in a blur, Kotaro narrowly evaded it by tilting his head back, his reflexes razor-sharp even at the edge of exhaustion. Nathan watched the exchange intently, every muscle tensed and ready. There would be no second chances for Kotaro. With Shisui's assault flawlessly executed and Kotaro forced onto the defensive, Nathan prepared to press the attack and break the limit that stood between them and victory. Nathan barely had time to brace himself when Uchiha Shisui's blade whistled past his head. If he'd been facing only Shisui, he could have retreated, collected himself, and waited for his strength to return. But today, he was outnumbered. No sooner had he ducked under Shisui's strike than he felt another presence behind him. Nathan whirled too late. Kaguya Kotaro's eyes narrowed as he focused his corpse bone vein technique. Even without a moment to raise a shield, Kotaro's will surge through his skeletal structure, reshaping bones beneath his skin into a defensive layer. As Nathan brought his wind-imbued long sword down, the blade rang out against the hardened bone like steel on steel. Undeterred, Nathan channeled more wind-release chakra into the edge, willing it to slice through. A grinding screech echoed as blade met armor, but no matter how much force he poured in, the bone plating held firm. Kotaro took a confident step back, the crackle of chakra still flickering beneath his flesh. "Your tricks won't work on me," he taunted, tightening his stance for the next exchange. Shisui hovered at Kotaro's flank, ready to strike again. Nathan steadied his breath, meeting both opponents' gazes. He couldn't afford hesitation, not with skill and speed like theirs bearing down on him. Drawing in a steady stream of wind chakra, he readied for the momentum-shifting move he'd need to break through Kotaro's uncanny defense. Nathan's breakthrough in developing his own corpse bone vein was more than skin deep. By transforming his bones into living steel, he'd given his longsword an almost impenetrable edge. When he struck, he couldn't shatter Kaguya Kotaro's bone armor, but he did carve a deep, jagged wound into it, one that would demand an enormous surge of chakra to mend. From Nathan's vantage point behind their foe, he couldn't see the full impact. But Uchiha Shisui, standing before Kotaro, saw the damage clearly. A sudden pallor crept over Kotaro's face, an unmistakable sign that he was bleeding chakra fast. In battle, weakness invited attack. Shisui's normally gentle temperament vanished in an instant. This was no time for mercy. With a deft tap of his toes against the ground, he vaulted backward, seamlessly weaving his fingers into hand seals on the fly. "Fire escape, great dragon fire technique," he called out. In an instant, a column of blistering flames erupted from Shisui's mouth, rushing forward in a roaring torrent toward Kaguya Kotaro. The battlefield flared with heat as the ninjutsu carried them both into the next desperate exchange. In an instant, 3 blazing dragons materialized in midair, roaring as they bore down on Kaguya Kotaro from the left, center, and right. Uchiha Shisui had clearly concluded that brute force alone wouldn't break Kaguya's defenses, so he shifted smoothly into ninjutsu. Just moments ago, Shisui had found himself hamstrung by Kaguya's entangling techniques, but with Nathan's help alongside him, there was nothing holding him back now. As the dragons lunged forward, Nathan's eyes flared. Within each pupil, the 3 Magatama ignited, and without conscious effort, he absorbed an upgraded form of his own jutsu. On his skill panel, the outdated fire style, Dragon Fire Technique, once listed as level 500, shimmered and transformed. The new entry read, Fire Style, Great Dragon Fire Technique, level 5000. He'd done it. Nathan felt the thrill of breakthrough surge through him, but there was no time to savor the moment. He was standing directly behind Kaguya Kotaro, who was caught between him and Shisui. Any attack Shisui unleashed would slice through them both. Nathan tensed. He needed to move, fast. Nathan sheathed his sword with a mere thought and dropped back, instantly widening the gap between himself and Kaguya Kotaro. No sooner had he put space between them than 3 fiery dragons erupted from his hand and lunged at Kotaro. The Kaguya shinobi twisted aside, narrowly dodging 2 of the blazing beasts, but the third struck true. In desperation, Kotaro reshaped his bones into a crude arm guard. There was a thunderous crack as the dragon slammed into his shield, sending a torrent of flames surging around it. From the heart of that inferno, Kotaro stumbled free. His once pristine garments were reduced to charred rags, and his skin was blackened and blistered. Though his clan's fabled corpse vein strengthened his physique far beyond an ordinary ninja's, the devastation was unmistakable. He should have been down for the count. Yet he staggered on. Scarcely had Kotaro emerged from the blaze when Nathan launched his follow-up assault. Nathan didn't even pause to sheath his longsword. With a single-handed seal, he unleashed the fire style, Phoenix Fire Technique. Dozens of blazing orbs burst from his palm, hurtling toward Kaguya Kotaro like fiery petals on the wind. Kotaro's eyes flared. Years of training in the willow dance and chibi dance granted him uncanny flexibility. He twisted, dipped, and vaulted, evading almost every fireball. Those he couldn't dodge he met with the stubborn resilience of his corpse vein jutsu, which coursed chakra into his bones to lessen the burns. Still, he staggered as embers licked his flesh, a gout of blood scattering at his feet. Glaring at Nathan and Uchiha Shisui, Kotaro let the corpse chakra swirl through him again. With a series of sickening cracks, 2 swords of pure bone erupted from either side of his torso. He hefted them, their serrated edges gleaming in the haze of heat and chakra, then charged. Nathan's jaw tightened. "So he really is insane," he muttered. He raised his blade in one smooth motion and stepped forward, meeting Kotaro's bone swords head-on. His raw close-quarters skill outmatched even Shisui's, so he would tackle the front line. Beside him, Shisui melted into the shadows, eyes sharp for any opening, waiting to strike with lethal precision. Together, they collided with the madman's assault, steel and bone ringing out in the scorched air. Nathan's ally, Uchiha Shisui, was no slouch in combat. Even without a word between them, Shisui instantly grasped Nathan's intent. The moment Nathan lunged, Shisui slipped away with a blur of movement, his signature flash step. A metallic ring echoed through the clearing as Nathan drove his sword to its limit against Kaguya Kotaro. Steel met steel in a furious exchange, each strike and parry sharpened by desperation. All the while, Shisui remained motionless at the edge of the fight, watching and waiting. Kotaro's eyes seemed to spin as he struggled to keep pace, his mind teetering on the brink of collapse from Nathan's relentless assault. Just when it looked as though Kotaro might overwhelm Nathan, Shisui made his move, a decisive, killing strike that landed with a resonant clang. Thrown back by the surprise blow, Kotaro steadied himself, refusing to yield. He gathered every ounce of strength and launched himself at Nathan once more, pressing the attack with bone-shattering force. Nathan sensed the opportunity hidden in Kotaro's overcommitment. Bracing himself against the opponent's onslaught, fully aware of the razor-sharp bone spurs Kotaro could spring at will, Nathan gritted his teeth and met the charge head-on, refusing to give ground. For a heartbeat, Kotaro's bloodshot eyes cleared. In that moment of ruthless clarity, he lashed out, channeling his cursed ability to harden and project the bones in his chest. Ribbons of bone spurs tore through the air and through Nathan's defenses, ripping gaping wounds into Nathan's side. Staggering back, Nathan tasted blood, but he refused to fall. The battle had only just begun. At that moment, Uchiha Shisui vanished in a blur as he unleashed his body flicker technique. In the next heartbeat, he had already materialized behind Kaguya Kotaro, and his kunai was buried deep in Kotaro's back with a muffled gasp of metal against flesh. Kotaro staggered forward, coughing up a spray of blood, his breath coming in ragged, weakening gasps. Seizing the opening, Nathan dropped his own blade and lunged in. With a single precise motion, he drove his knife in on the diagonal. The steel blade whispered through the air, and then silenced Kotaro's carotid artery with a clean cut. A torrent of blood exploded out, drenching the ground as the bone-crafted sword slipped from Kotaro's grasp and clattered onto the floor. Kotaro's hand flew to his neck, fingers clutching at the gushing wound, but the pressure could not staunch the flow. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. Limbs trembling, he crumpled to his knees, and then collapsed, unmoving, onto the cold earth. Chapter 456, Plan B. The second Kotaro Kaguya fell, every missed shinobi within earshot froze as if struck by lightning. Blades stilled in midair, and for a heartbeat the battlefield went silent. The Kaguya clan was infamous for its savagery. Villages whispered of their bloodlust and ruthless killings, but in combat they were the embodiment of raw power. With Kotaro dead, the mist symbol of strength lay broken, and morale shattered instantly. Nathan felt no pity. He had seized his chance and would not let it slip. After a single steadying breath, he turned away from Uchiha Shisui and melted into another clash of jonin. From his vantage point, Shisui watched Nathan's retreating figure slip between combatants, heading for fresh targets. He spared a glance for the Konoha shinobi still fighting desperately nearby, let out a soft sigh, and then rejoined the ranks of his fellow Kirigakure jonin. With the arrival of those two master-level ninja, Kirigakure's forces were teetering on the edge of defeat. On the jonin front lines, Konoha's veteran shinobi pressed the siege home. One by one, Kirigakure's jonin fell, injured or slain. Each high-level casualty sent ripples of fear through the ranks, dragging the morale of their chunin and jinin down from a fighting 100% to barely 60 or 70. By contrast, Konoha's younger ninjas, sensing victory at hand, hurled their kunai with fresh ferocity. Under such unrelenting pressure, Kirigakure's lines began a steady, inexorable retreat. Down in the valley, perched atop a massive oak, Chuju Yasuda watched with a dark scowl. He had planned to hold out for at least an hour or two, but not even 1 hour had passed before his delaying action unraveled. His carefully laid strategy lay in ruins. Sweeping his gaze over the advancing Konoha Jinin, he finally fixed on Nathan and Uchiha Shisui. Two key factors, he realized, lay behind this calamitous reversal. Nathan's first shock came when Konoha threw nearly its entire Blackstone Fortress contingent into the fray. He'd expected a small ambush. After all, with Nathan's keen eye for detail, it would have been natural for them to send one or two squads along the march. Instead, Konoha struck with everything they had, pushing their full combat strength to its limit. He'd never seen such ruthless, all-in aggression. The second alarm bell was the presence of the fortress's two greatest shinobi, Nathan himself and Uchiha Shisui. Though Shisui, nicknamed Shunshin Shisui, was undeniably formidable, he'd been tied down early on by Kotaro Kuya and hadn't managed to inflict serious losses. Nathan, on the other hand, had already carved a path of devastation. He killed Ichiro Hase single-handedly, then teamed up with another Konoha Jonin to mortally wound Ito Shohei, who ultimately fell by that same ally's hand. Later, during a siege orchestrated by Kenta Shimizu and a Kirigakure Jonin, Nathan wounded one attacker and slew Shimizu, leaving Konoha with no reserve Jonin to throw into the battle. Caught between Konoha's overwhelming numbers and the lethal prowess of its own star shinobi, Nathan realized this confrontation would test every ounce of his skill and every limit of endurance. The battle had reached a critical turning point. Nathan moved relentlessly among the fray, supporting his fellow Konoha Jonin with ruthless efficiency. In rapid succession, he struck down 3 Kirigakure Jonin, shattering their defenses and seizing the advantage. Moments earlier, he had joined forces with Uchiha Shisui to eliminate their last line of support, Kaguya Kotaro, delivering the decisive blow that broke the enemy's resolve. It became painfully clear that Nathan was the architect of their defeat, the one who had single-handedly unraveled their entire strategy. Yasuda Chuju stared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. But beneath that fury lay a deeper, more unsettling fear. Nathan's display of power had left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Nathan clenched his jaw to stifle his frustration, inhaling deeply before giving the order without another thou. Lieutenant Yokoyama, activate Plan B immediately. Plan B? Lieutenant Yokoyama's voice wavered. Sir, is it really time to go that far? Nathan cut him off with a cold snap. No more questions. Carry it out now. Yes, Captain. Yokoyama Yukio bowed sharply and hurried away to relay the command. Nathan watched his retreating back, eyes shadowed with grim resolve. After a long, tense moment, he whispered under his breath, "This is our last chance. If we hesitate any longer, the price will be more than just a few lives." Plan B was nothing less than a deliberate sacrifice. A rear guard of mist ninjas would remain behind, giving their lives to slow the enemy's pursuit and guarantee the safe withdrawal of the main force. It was a desperate gambit, but they had no other choice. He didn't expect this backup plan to do any good. It was simply his habit of preparing for defeat before hoping for victory that prompted it. With a loud bang, Yasuda Chuju drove his fist into the trunk of a nearby tree, frustration burning in his eyes. But however unwilling he was, he had no choice. Their side was finished. Even if they held out a little longer, defeat was inevitable. In a world where wars might involve ordinary shinobi, but were ultimately decided by the most powerful combatants, their elite fighters had already been routed. Prolonging the battle would only mean a slow, agonizing death. And even if they somehow delayed long enough for reinforcements to arrive, they would never fulfill their original mission, to join forces with their allies and annihilate the invading Konoha ninjas. To spare his men from needless slaughter, he resolved that the only option was to withdraw. For now. Breathe in, breathe out. Nathan drew a steadying breath, expelled it slowly, and let his racing thoughts settle. He forced his mind into sharp focus, then tapped into Kirigakure's relay network. With deliberate calm, he began issuing the coded commands that would trigger their fallback. Minute by minute, the orders spread across the battlefield. The hidden mist shinobi lacked the Yamanaka clan's direct telepathy, but they made up for it with practiced signals, swift messengers, and sealed scrolls carried by hand. Even amid the chaos, each unit assigned to Plan B received Nathan's instructions. For some it was a relief, for others a blow to morale. A few even broke down in frustration. Yet by the end of the 15-minute window, every squad was in position. A piercing whistle split the air, the signal to begin the retreat. At once, designated teams peeled away and fell back along prearranged routes. Their comrades filled the gaps, establishing rearguard lines designed to slow any pursuit. Naturally, the Konoha shinobi surged forward, eager to press their advantage and overtake those slipping away. But the mist soldiers were prepared. With disciplined formations and well-timed feints, they worked to blunt the chase and shepherd their entire force safely from the fray. The remaining Kirigakure operatives abandoned any pretense of conserving chakra. They unleashed wave after wave of high-level ninjutsu in rapid succession, forcing the Konoha shinobi to break off their pursuit. That was exactly the point of Kirigakure's Plan B. A few mist ninja who'd hesitated fell behind, but the vast majority slipped away unharmed, and in this kind of operation, that was victory enough. Yasuda Akiku surveyed his squad, then without another word shouted, "Retreat!" He vaulted to his feet and led the charge. His team followed instantly, and within moments the mist ninjas had vanished beyond the trees. But instead of circling back to Feiyu Town as anyone might expect, they pressed on, emerging from the valley and turning their boots toward the black stone stronghold at the far end. Clearly, Yasuda Akiku had no intention of giving up. Plan B was still very much in motion. Plan B was to sever the tail and ensure our survival. But we wouldn't fall back immediately. Instead, we'd first rendezvous with the other Mist Ninja team, then launch a coordinated assault on Konoha's Blackstone stronghold. Chapter 457 Pursuit. 15 minutes later, an eerie calm settled over the valley. The Hidden Mist Village's ninjas lay defeated, their figures scattered like fallen shadows across the blood-stained ground. A soft swish of wind heralded another presence beside Nathan. He didn't need to look to know it was Sano Nobuhisa. Without ceremony, Sano said, "The Mist Ninjas broke formation and fled for their base. I want you to follow them and keep an eye on everything they do." "Just observe?" Nathan asked, turning to look at him. Sano paused, as if weighing his words. "No. If they reach their stronghold before our main force and launch an assault, you must delay them for as long as possible." Nathan frowned. "Alone, I won't be enough." This operation was nothing like the raid on the Mist Village 2 days ago. The enemy force approaching their base was larger, far better organized, and far more dangerous. Even with the power of Tianjiu at his back, Nathan didn't intend to risk a solo fight against overwhelming odds. Before he could argue further, Sano raised a hand. "Of course you won't be on your own. I've dispatched a small squadron to rendezvous with you. You'll lead them in shadowing and, if necessary, slowing the enemy advance." Nathan exhaled slowly, tension giving way to resolve. "Understood. I'll hold them off until reinforcements arrive." Sano gave a curt nod. "Good. Move out and stay sharp." With that, he vanished into the fading light, leaving Nathan at the mouth of the valley, ready to pursue the fleeing mist ninjas into the night. "By the time they left, I'd already dispatched 2 teams, Sano Nobuhisa explained. "Right now they're tailing the mist ninjas. If you need backup, just issue the order, and they'll move in. Meanwhile, I'll marshal part of my own forces and chase them down at top speed. All I ask is that you keep the enemy occupied for a little while longer." Nathan considered the offer for a moment. The general had done his part. Refusing now would be unreasonable, and with those reinforcements on the way, the danger was minimal. He nodded. "Understood." Standing, he flicked the blade free of a dark stain of blood, wiped it clean on his sleeve, and slipped it back into its scabbard. He faced Sano Nobuhisa. "I'm leaving now." Before another word could be exchanged, Nathan formed hand seals in a blur of motion and summoned his ninjutsu. "Wind escape, wind wings!" A soft roar of air answered him, and pale blue chakra feathers sprouted from his back. He flexed the wings, felt their power, and with a single powerful flap he shot upward, vanishing into the sky like a streak of living wind. Nathan completed a single turn in midair, then shot off toward the direction the mist ninja had fled. From below, Sano Nobuhisa watched his silhouette vanish and finally exhaled in relief. He didn't linger for a second longer. Rallying his men, he ordered an all-out pursuit at top speed. Though the mist ninja pressed on swiftly, none could rival Nathan's aerial pace. With a rough heading locked in, he closed the distance in minutes. Just as he prepared to swoop down, a familiar mental ping cut through his focus. Yamanaka Aoi's voice. "Jonin Nathan, you're in range." Aoi had hitched a ride with Sano's pursuit squad, relaying everything by telepathy. Nathan acknowledged her relay with a quick nod, felt rather than seen, and sent back, "I'm here. Where are you positioned?" Below him, the Kirigakure team fanned out among the treetops and rocky outcrops. Nathan activated his Sharingan, letting the Crimson Tomoe sharpen his view. Every branch and shadow passed under his scrutiny as he searched for the Mist Ninja's trail. In a few beats, he would close in and bring the chase to an end. Nathan barely had time to register the warning before a blinding flash seared across his vision, forcing him to squeeze his eyes shut. The glare vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. When he opened his eyes again and scanned the area, he found himself staring at more than 30 Leaf Shinobi, undoubtedly the two squads Sano Nobuhisa had warned him about. The flash had been nothing more than sunlight reflected off small mirrors, a simple ruse to draw his attention. It wasn't a particularly clever trick, but it worked. And, crucially, it was hidden. Aside from Nathan himself, no one else had noticed the anomaly, and the Kirigakure contingent ahead remained blissfully unaware. Stepping back into the shadows, Nathan reached out mentally to Yamanaka Aoi. "Keep tracking their movements. I'm heading forward to get a better look." There was a heartbeat of silence before her calm reply came through his mind. "Understood, Jonan Nathan. Stay safe." "All right." Nathan's single-word reply dissolved the lingering strands of the foe's chakra and mental energy. With a powerful beat of his wings, he plunged toward the Kirigakure squad below. Instantly, the shinobi tensed, scrambling for formation. But Nathan merely feinted, then angled upward, high out of reach. He repeated the dive and rise twice more. Each time, the ninjas slowed, unsettled by the aerial harassment. Only when Yasuda Akiju shouted orders did they steel themselves and press on at full speed. Nathan tried a few more approaches, but the Kirigakure team refused to be baited again. Abandoning the tactic, he climbed steadily, looping lazily overhead until boredom crept in. Floating on the wind, he sealed his hands and invoked the mind communication technique. A crackle of silent thought carried his brief message to Yamanaka Aoi below. Mission clear, he turned northward and soared off toward the Blackstone stronghold. Nathan lifted into the air, planning to fly back and confirm whether the Mist Ninja team from Feiyu Town had arrived. By his calculations, they shouldn't be there yet. But he wasn't willing to rely on estimates alone. There was nothing pressing to do here for the moment, and a quick round trip wouldn't set him back. With that in mind, he quietly ignored Sano Nobuhisa's orders to maintain surveillance on the incoming force. As soon as Nathan disappeared over the treetops, Yasuda Akiju's face darkened. He had hoped to seize this window of opportunity to strike the Blackstone stronghold, but now that plan seemed all but impossible. Nathan's speed meant the Feiyu Town ninjas would surely reach the stronghold first and warn their comrades. Without the element of surprise, any attack would risk a coordinated counterstrike. He could end up caught between two forces. Akiju clenched his jaw. This was a gamble he couldn't afford to take. Akiku Yasuda exhaled sharply and turned his gaze away. "What a shame," he muttered under his breath. There was no choice but to stick to the original plan and rendezvous with Captain Osawa, but he knew he'd earn no praise for it. In fact, he'd have to offer his apologies for the losses suffered by the Kirigakure ninjas. The thought soured his expression. Meanwhile, after more than 10 minutes in the air, Nathan finally caught sight of the Blackstone base below. Its looming dark towers and fortified walls spread out beneath him, signaling that his next challenge was close at hand. Chapter 458, Reconnaissance and Action. High above the Blackstone stronghold, Nathan hovered silently on his kunai. From this vantage point, he could see the Konoha forces arrayed below, tense but disciplined. No skirmishes had broken out, which meant the other team of Mist Shinobi hadn't arrived yet. If Sano Nobuhisa's squad returned before them, the stronghold would likely be secure. Nathan scanned the perimeter. A few Konoha ninja moving patrols glanced upward, but they hadn't sounded the alarm. He realized they might need his help if the mist attacked in force, so he dropped down lightly behind a craggy outcrop. The moment his feet touched solid rock, a shadow detached itself from the formation. A Konoha shinobi sprang forward with blinding speed, an instant body technique, coming to a halt less than an arm's length away. "Nathan, how are things on your end?" the young man panted, worry and relief rippling in his voice. Nathan offered a reassuring smile. Captain Mori, we set the ambush exactly as planned. The enemy column is shattered. Many mist ninjas are down or fleeing. There's hardly a foothold left. Captain Mori exhaled sharply. That's a relief. We were getting nervous. There's still time? Just enough, Nathan said, eyes flicking toward the distant ridge. Sano's team should be back before the rest of their reinforcements arrive. Once they link up with us, we'll seal off every escape route. Mori glanced over his shoulder at the rest of the squad. All right, let's move out and secure the east gate. We'll waste no time chaining this place shut. Nathan nodded and vaulted over the rocky ledge. Below, the stronghold's walls loomed, dark stone spires etched against a blood-red sky. Somewhere inside, the missing villagers still awaited rescue. As Nathan and Captain Mori sprinted toward the gate, the wind carried the faintest rumble of footsteps. He paused, guessing that Sano Nobuhisa's team was closing in from the west. Get ready, he murmured. Reinforcements are almost here. Mori tightened the straps on his armor. Then, let's give the Mist Ninjas a proper welcome. Together, they vanished toward the fortress entrance, determined to end this battle before more enemies could appear. The stronghold stood on the brink, yet with any luck, by nightfall, it would be firmly under Konoha's control. Captain Sano is leading his men back, Nathan reported. Mori Mutetsuichi exhaled, relief washing over him, and finally relaxed his shoulders. Nathan watched him closely, frowning. He knew better than to let his guard down in times like these. By the way, Nathan added, some of the enemy slipped through our lines and are racing this way. I don't know if they intend to strike you directly, but you'd better be ready for anything. Mori's eyes snapped open. What? A few Konoha shinobi nearby, who'd been straining to overhear, straightened at Nathan's warning, their expressions turning tense. Satisfied that his message had landed, Nathan gave a slight nod. He wasn't about to let them falter at the last minute. Mori Mutetsuichi was the first to speak up. And Yasuda Akiku and her team? What happened to them? Nathan hesitated only a moment before relaying every detail he'd been able to observe. No omissions, no exaggerations. The men listened in grim silence. Nathan studied the battle reports. It's true that Yasuda Akiku's team and the others who survived the tail-breaking trial have been badly depleted, but Moriki Tetsuichi's unit at Blackstone Base still packs serious firepower. What worries me most is the latest intel. Another squad of Mist Ninjas is closing in by sea. If those two forces link up for a joint assault, Moriki's position could become untenable. Moriki's face grew stony at the news. I could see the tension in his jaw. He knew exactly how dire the situation might become if he was caught between two ninja contingents. Fearing he might panic and make a fatal mistake, I pressed on quickly. Relax. We've dispatched two ninja teams in pursuit of that incoming squad, and Captain Sano has sent a Rapidar response unit that's already racing your way. They're there to reinforce you, not to engage your men. Moriki's stern expression softened marginally. Really? He asked, voice still tight but steadier than before. I nodded, letting him draw strength from the confirmation. With that assurance, the worst of his worry seemed to lift, and for now at least, we'd bought him the breathing room he needed. Nathan didn't bother responding. After a curt nod of farewell, he activated wind-style wind wings. A pair of swirling, translucent wings sprouted from his back, lifting him high into the air. He angled toward the open sea, intent on locating another squad of Mist Ninjas. Information, he reminded himself, was just as vital as strength. Knowing your enemy's position could mean the difference between victory and defeat. With wind wings, he could survey the battlefield from above, collect every scrap of intelligence, and confirm whether Sano Nobuhisa's diversionary team had successfully delayed the mist. Less than half an hour later, Nathan spotted movement below. Gliding downward for a closer look, he discovered a fierce skirmish unfolding on the water's surface. A contingent of Mist Ninjas had disembarked from their warships and was in the process of surrounding a small group of Konoha shinobi. Squinting against the glare of the sun, Nathan recognized those defenders immediately. They were the very harassers Sano Nobuhisa had sent. But where were the rest of them? According to his latest intel, their numbers should have been far greater. Perching on a rocky outcrop jutting from the sea, Nathan activated his Sharingan. Crimson Tomoe flared in his eyes as he methodically scanned every opponent every blade of seaweed drifting between them, and every ripple of chakra. The answers he gleaned here would guide his next move, and potentially turn the tide of this battle. Nathan scanned the battlefield, but saw no sign of anyone else. It looked as though only this handful of Konoha shinobi remained standing. He couldn't tell whether their comrades were hiding in the shadows, poised to strike, or already fallen. All he knew was that in front of him stood only these few, and their combined strength was obviously no match for the Mist Ninja fleet bearing down on them. Though the Mist forces had dispatched a small detachment to tie up the defenders, the fleet itself pressed on relentlessly. At this pace, it would reach the outskirts of the Blackstone stronghold long before Nobuhisa Sano and the reinforcements returned. Once there, the invaders would clash with Akiku Yasuda's team, and the stronghold would be in dire peril, an outcome Nathan refused to accept. His mind raced through every possibility before he let out a low, determined sigh. "No more waiting," he muttered. "I have to act now." Without hesitation, Nathan summoned chakra to his back. 2 luminous wings burst forth, feathered strands of energy fluttering like living things. In an instant, he plunged forward toward the Mist Ninja unit besieging his comrades, cutting through the air at a breathtaking 40 meters per second. Nathan had no intention of attacking the fleet directly, far too risky for a lone operator. A few days ago, the Kirigakure flotilla had been lightly staffed and easy to handle. Now, each warship bristled with elite Kirigakure shinobi. A solo strike might not cost him his life, but it would certainly inflict injuries and, at best, only delay their progress for a little while. That kind of token resistance wasn't worth it. Instead, Nathan planned to free the captured Konoha ninjas first. With them at his side, he'd have allies, distractions, and options he simply wouldn't enjoy on his own. Even deploying a handful of rescued shinobi as bait would draw enemy fire, dramatically reducing the danger to him while creating openings. If he seized those openings and sank just 1 or 2 of the Kirigakure warships, the psychological blow to the enemy would be enormous, far more than a few reckless strikes. Before he could fully execute his plan, however, the Akuri scouts finally caught his trail. Everything was about to move faster than he'd anticipated. Nathan, the shinobi bearing the transplanted Byakugan, moved faster than Ozawa Yuki's lookouts could react. Even though Yuki had stationed watchers to monitor the skies out of fear for Nathan's power, the alert came too late. By the time news reached him, Nathan was already swooping down toward the fleet, just the window he needed to strike. High above the battlefield, Nathan hovered unseen as Kirigakure's ninjas tightened their blockade around Konoha. Then, in an instant, he unleashed his attack. Silent as the wind, a volley of shurikens streaked outward. A Kirigakure Chunin at the front sensed danger and sprang aside, breaking formation. But Nathan had anticipated every move. The moment his target slipped from harm's way, he formed a quick hand seal and unleashed his ninjutsu, fire style, dragon fire technique. A pillar of scorching flame roared to life, coiling around the unsuspecting ninja ranks. Despite the damp sea air's dampening effect on fire jutsu, Nathan's chakra surged with enough intensity to turn the battlefield into a blazing inferno. Within seconds, chaos erupted below as the dragon fire technique set ships and armor alight, and with it, the tide of battle had already shifted. Chapter 459, The Kill Boom. A massive dragon of fire burst from Nathan's hands, hurtling straight at the lone Kirigakure Chunin. The shinobi, newly separated from his squad, barely had time to register the superheated beam roaring overhead before it slashed into him. He twisted in a frantic attempt to dodge, but the attack struck too swiftly. "No!" His voice cracked as the blazing beast pinned him against the churning sea. Salt water surged up around them, eager to swallow the Chunin whole, but Nathan's inferno blazed hotter still, instantly vaporizing the encroaching waves and immolating its victim in a single, terrible instant. Nathan watched the life drain from the fallen ninja. "Whoever said fire release can't kill obviously hasn't seen this technique," he murmured. "K. Nathan-sensei?" Several Konoha shinobi who had watched the entire exchange stared wide-eyed. In the blink of an eye, Nathan had materialized, wiped out an enemy, and dissolved back into the fray. They shouted his name in excitement and disbelief, but Nathan paid them no mind. His gaze was already fixed on the next threat looming on the horizon. Nathan muttered under his breath, drew a steady breath, then activated Wind Escape, Wind Wings, and dove toward the sea below. Attacking from the air would minimize his risk, but it wouldn't free the captured Konoha Shinobi. Harassment alone wouldn't be enough. He needed a direct confrontation. With a heavy splash, he landed on the churning water. In the same fluid motion, he drew his longsword, unleashed the instant sword technique, and surged forward at a nearby Kirigakure Chunin. His blade cut the air in a silver arc. Locking eyes with his foe, Nathan tapped into his Sharingan and executed the illusion sword technique. To the Chunin's eyes, the single slash multiplied into 3 identical strikes, each as swift and deadly as the last. The 3 phantom blades all came from the same direction, but there was a subtle rhythm to their motion. The Chunin hesitated, unable to determine which attack was real. That split-second uncertainty was all Nathan needed. He pivoted the true strike, driving his sword into the man's chest. Nathan's blade whistled through the air and bit cleanly into flesh and bone. A deep gash opened across the Kirigakure Chunin's chest, and scarlet arcs of blood fountained down to dye the surface of the sea below. A strangled cry escaped the wounded shinobi's lips, but even as pain lanced through him, Nathan flicked his wrist. The longsword in his hand shifted from a cleaving slash to a precise upward cut, right across the Chunin's throat. The man's scream died on his blood-soaked lips. The knife clattered from his nerveless fingers, and he staggered backward 2 steps before pitching headlong into the water. Silence fell over the battlefield. Both Kirigakure and Konoha Shinobi stood frozen, eyes locked on Nathan, their expressions a mix of shock and awe. No one had expected him to dispatch 2 Chunin so effortlessly the moment he arrived. Yet Ozawa Yushu had seen enough in Nathan to entrust him with this mission, and now every onlooker knew he was more than capable of living up to that faith. Nathan's sudden display of power had left everyone reeling. In the blink of an eye, he'd taken out 2 mist shinobi, no small feat, and both sides couldn't hide their shock. The Leaf Ninja were elated, cheering at the unexpected advantage, while the mist operatives who remained were visibly shaken, fear flickering in their eyes. Nathan paid their reactions no mind. He tilted his head, scanning the dozen mist ninja who had just leapt from their warship and were charging straight at him. We can't let them regroup, he thought. We have to end this fast. Without hesitation, he molded chakra in his palms and unleashed the shadow clone technique. A heavy cloud of smoke billowed around him, and when it cleared, there were 6 Nathans where there had only been 1. 2 of the clones darted forward to meet the oncoming mist shinobi, engaging them at range to buy time. The remaining 3 clones and out, closing the distance to cut down those who'd pressed too close. In an instant, blades clashed and shuriken flew, the renewed skirmish erupting with brutal intensity. Both sides dove back into the fray, but Nathan's clones were already weaving through the ranks, turning what had been an ambush into a rapid rout. With Nathan's arrival, the Konoha squad suddenly felt the pressure lift. In turn, his allies made it easier for him to spot weaknesses in the opposing Kirigakure shinobi. Within seconds, Nathan identified his moment. He teamed up with a Konoha special jonin to take on a lone Kirigakure jonin. The enemy lunged at Nathan without warning. Instinctively, Nathan rolled aside, putting distance between them just as the jonin's blades sliced past. At that instant, the special jonin darted in from the flank, forcing the Kirigakure warrior to raise his kunai in defense. Seizing the opening, Nathan slammed his right foot against the water's surface. In a blink, an afterimage shimmered into existence before the startled jonin, longsword raised. As the enemy turned to face this new threat, Nathan's Sharingan snapped open, his blade glowing red. With a fluid motion, he unleashed the phantom sword technique. Nathan's illusion sword technique hit its mark. The Kirigakure jonin's mind staggered, his senses swimming as the phantom edge of a long blade flickered before his eyes. But a jonin's mental fortitude, reflexes, and combat experience far outclassed those of a chunin. Just as the illusion should have claimed him, he shook himself free. Knowing he couldn't survive another direct strike, he sprang back, toes flicking off the water's surface as he put distance between himself and Nathan. Exactly the response Nathan had anticipated. Through their heart-connecting technique, he issued his command, Now. Not 50 feet away, one of Nathan's shadow clones let the Jonin's return assault drift past, instead raising a hand to form a swift seal. A moment later, the air before the fleeing Akari Yosuke rippled and condensed into a razor-sharp gale, wind release, wind blade. A jolt of alarm coursed through Yosuke. His heart thundered in his chest as he twisted his body instinctively. The sweeping gust hissed over his head, severing several strands of his hair before disappearing into the night. He landed lightly on his feet, adrenaline surging, as he prepared for whatever Nathan would unleash next. Yosuke Akari's heart thundered in his chest. Relief at having survived the disaster flickered across his face, until a lone figure stepped into view. He looked up and froze. Who else could it be but Nathan? Nathan met his gaze, lips parting slightly as he spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Goodbye." In the next instant, a harsh rasp tore through the air, followed by a whirlwind of gale-force wind. Yosuke's eyes snapped to Nathan's outstretched right hand, where a colossal shuriken spun with terrifying speed. It gleamed with pure chakra, its edges slicing the atmosphere and driving the violent gusts that roared around them. Wind-style, spiral shuriken. Horror washed over Yosuke as recognition hit him. His pupils shrank, panic breaking into a desperate cry. "No!" The fear in his voice mirrored the futile protest of the first mist shinobi who had fallen to Nathan's fire style, Dragon Blaze. But even that raw defiance could not change what was coming. In the blink of an eye, Nathan surged forward and drove his right palm into his opponent. The swirling wind-style, Rasen Shuriken collapsed into a single radiant orb, instantly enveloping its target. Inside that glowing sphere, countless microscopic chakra needles spun in a frenzied dance, shredding cells and eradicating life at the molecular level. Chapter 460, Cooperation. Nathan's blade flashed and gutted the Kirigakure Jonin standing before him. He didn't even pause. His eyes were already scanning for the next target. Not far off, another Kirigakure Jonin was locked in combat with one of Nathan's shadow clones who had just unleashed a wind-style, wind blade. In that instant, Nathan's kunai found its mark in the clone's torso. A burst of chakra, and poof, the clone vanished. Even as the clone dissipated, the replay of that Jonin's movements flooded Nathan's Sharingan-enhanced vision. It was brief, but detailed enough. He turned to the Konoha Special Jonin at his side and called out, "With me!" In a heartbeat, Nathan vanished in a swirl of chakra and reappeared behind the enemy shinobi. He drew his sword in a single motion, his flash sword technique, and struck true. The second Kirigakure Jonin crumpled to the ground. No sooner had Nathan delivered the finishing blow than Omura Ken charged in to assist his comrade. Without breaking stride, Nathan met him head-on. Steel rang against steel as the two clashed across the battlefield. Clang, clang, clang. Metal rang out continuously, echoing over the chaos around them. Omura Ken didn't back down, but he'd clearly learned from watching Akabane Yosuke. Whenever possible, he evaded Nathan's attacks, only raising his blade to block when escape wasn't an option. He never risked a counterstrike, instead focusing entirely on defense and withdrawal. Nathan narrowed his eyes, sizing up Omura's style. This fight would require every ounce of speed and precision he had. But he was ready. After all, cooperation, whether with clones or comrades, was one of Konoha's greatest strengths. And Nathan intended to prove it once more. Nathan's opponent had only one objective: buy time. With defenses held at full strength, even someone of Nathan's skill would struggle to break through anytime soon. After all, a Jonin is still a Jonin. Akabane Yosuke fell not because he lacked power, but because he was pinned down by Nathan and Konoha's special Jonin. 2 fists versus 4 hands. It was no contest. Even more crucial was the mind link technique Nathan used with his shadow clone, telepathic coordination that let them anticipate each other's moves perfectly. Without that flawless teamwork, Nathan couldn't have landed a decisive blow so quickly. In the process, however, he lost his clone. Killing a Jonin is never easy, especially one so firmly focused on defense. Breaking through requires overwhelming force, and Nathan simply didn't have time to summon the full might of his Mangekyo Sharingan. He had no allies left to watch his back. As he weighed his options, Konoha's special Jonin finally arrived on the scene. Without a word, the newcomer slipped into position beside Nathan, ready to turn the tide of battle. In an instant, Nathan understood what his teammate was getting at. He slipped out of the primary attack role and began to circle Ken Omura, striking only when he saw an opening, covering his allies and probing for weaknesses. Thanks to his Uchiha heritage, Nathan pushed his 3 Magatama Sharingan to the limit. Every flourish of Omura's blade slowed to a crawl in his vision, every subtle shift in stance laid bare. Bit by bit, he deciphered the Jonin's fighting habits, and when his comrades unleashed their full-strength assault, Nathan pressed his own advantage, raining blows down on a staggered opponent. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, without warning, Omura shrugged off a thrown kunai and counterattacked. Nathan caught the brief flicker of emotion in the Konoha Special Jonin's eyes, a flash of pain, like a memory best left buried. In the next heartbeat, Omura spun his blade around to meet Nathan's kunai, and the clash rang out, a high, clear ding as metal met metal, the ringing echo trailing off into the charged air. Nathan's pupils dilated as he whispered under his breath, "Perfect opportunity." In an instant, a flash of emerald light enveloped him. He'd activated his instant sword technique. Before anyone could react, He appeared at Omura Ken's back, wind chakra roaring along the blade until a razor-sharp wind edge shimmered into view. Ken's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to turn around to know a sword was aimed straight for his spine. With no time to waste on the Konoha Special Jonin before him, he abandoned that duel and rolled sideways out of the attack's path. His evasion was flawless, but it left his flank wide open. Almost as if rehearsed, the Jonin seized the moment. He flicked his wrist and sent a kunai flying. Motioning through the air, the blade tore into Ken's side with a wet, slicing thud. A spray of blood arced to the ground, and Ken gasped, clutching the wound as he stumbled. In a heartbeat, the tide of battle had turned. Nathan's strike foiled, Ken wounded, and both opponents poised to press their advantage. Ken Omura barely registered the shallow cut burning across his right forearm. His attention was locked on Nathan, who, his throwing knife having missed its mark, was already shaping chakra into a hand seal. In that instant, Ken recognized the pattern of a fire jutsu forming. Without hesitation, he drew in a steady stream of chakra and traced the seals in rapid succession. "Sutin, water formation wall," he intoned, and a towering barrier of seawater erupted between them with a hiss of steam, shielding him from whatever Nathan unleashed next. Nathan answered in kind. He drew a deep breath and expelled a surge of flame that coalesced into the sinuous head of a fire dragon, its jaws gaping as it lunged toward Ken's protective wall. A thrill of triumph surged through Ken. His prediction had been spot on. Though the water formation wall could withstand many types of ninjutsu, it was particularly effective against fire techniques. The shield held firm, its rippling surface absorbing the dragon's fiery assault, and Ken couldn't help but feel he had made the right call. Nathan's move should have bought him plenty of time, yet the moment he finished his hand seals, his confident smile froze into a look of sheer shock. He hadn't unleashed the basic fire style, dragon flame, he'd intended. Instead, he'd activated the far more powerful fire style, great dragon flame. Unlike the simpler variant, this technique splits into 3 blazing dragons that can strike from multiple angles. Across from him, Omura Ken erected a water-style, water wall. It was only a common jutsu, nowhere near as sophisticated as Senju Tobirama's legendary circular barrier, and could block attacks only head-on. As the central fire dragon slammed into the wall, Nathan's chakra divided into 3 distinct currents. He steered the remaining 2 dragons to sweep in from the left and right. The water wall held firm against the frontal assault, but the flanking dragons slipped around its edges, closing in on Ken from both sides in a deadly pincer. Nathan watched with cool satisfaction as Ken Omura narrowly dodged the fire dragon's head-on assault, but even so, the swirling inferno scorched his arms and singed his cloak. This was Nathan's first attempt at the fire release, Great Dragon Inferno technique, a jutsu he had only recently mastered under Uchiha Shisui's tutelage. In the right circumstances, it was devastatingly effective, yet because this was his very first casting, his control wavered. Had he been more practiced, Ken Omura would never have managed to summon his own technique in response, water release, water wall formation, so quickly. In the end, however, the outcome spoke for itself. Ken Omura simply hadn't caught a break.